1989, roughly 115 million Americans found themselves in the heart of the wildest decade in modern history. It was a time of jazz music, the temperance movement, the rise of the automobile, and freedoms never before seen. The 20s roared with electric, revolutionary energy. But for most, daily life was a strange mix of ancient traditions and shocking modernity. This is what it was really like during America's most transformative decade. Quick favor, if you're enjoying this, give it a like or a subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. I saw a message from someone in Tokyo last week who said it was already tomorrow there. My brain still struggles with that. Tonight's journey, America in the 1920s. But hold on, get comfortable first. Fluff up those pillows. Pull that blanket tight. Trust me, once we get going, you won't want to budge. Your eyes open to a New York City tenement apartment. The year is 1921. The first thing that assaults your senses is the noise. A constant, low-frequency hum of shared lives, voices echoing through paper-thin walls. The pipes chatter and hiss as hot water travels through the building's ancient arteries, punctuated by a distant infant's wail somewhere down the hall. You're on a metal-framed bed with a lumpy cotton mattress, one that carries the faint, damp odor of mildew and sweat. This isn't your cozy bed now. This one is shared with your brother, who's already up and rinsing his face at the small basin balanced precariously on a wooden chair. "Rise and shine, slugger," he says, splashing cold water on his face. Factory whistles will be screaming in less than an hour. The room is a cramped shoebox, maybe 10 feet square, with 2 beds taking up almost all the floor space. A single window, grimy and small, looks out onto a brick wall just an arm's reach away across an air shaft. This window is your only source of fresh air, which means in summer, you choose between a stifling, airless room or an absolute lack of privacy. In winter, like now, icy drafts seep through the loose frame, rendering the thin blankets almost useless. You know that feeling when your alarm goes off, but your bed is so warm you can't bear to leave it? Multiply that by 1,000. It's January in New York, and the only heat comes from a coal stove in the main room that your mother is already firing up. You can hear her a few feet away, her soft, rattling cough from the coal dust. The entire apartment holds only 4 rooms. This bedroom you share with your brother, another tiny bedroom for your parents and 2 sisters, the main room that doubles as the kitchen and living area, and a small water closet with a toilet. That toilet is a luxury, a true sign of progress. Some tenements still rely on outhouses in the back courtyard, but your toilet is just that, toilet. No bathtub, no shower. For that, you head to the public bathhouse once a week. "Ma's making real coffee today," your brother says, toweling off. Not that chicory stuff. Speaking of survival, that's the first thought that hits your brain every morning in 1921. How are we going to make it through today? The alarm clock on the nightstand cost a week's wages, but it's a non-negotiable expense. Miss your shift at the garment factory, and someone will take your spot before lunch. There's always a hungry line of new immigrants waiting for work. I spent an insane amount of time researching the layouts of these places. Did you know some of them didn't have any windows at all, except in the front room? They were literal death traps where people lived for decades. Your stomach growls as you swing your legs over the side of the bed. The wooden floor is a shock of ice against your bare feet. In your modern bed right now, you might have a plush carpet, warm socks, or slippers waiting for you. Here it's bare, splintery wood and the cold that finishes waking you up. Ma traded some darning for an extra loaf for Mrs. Goldstein, your brother says, pulling on a patched shirt. So there's actual toast. Food. Always food. The constant, gnawing calculation of calories versus cost. Your factory job pays an average of $12 a week for 60 hours of work. Rent for this 4-room tenement apartment is $30 a month. Do the math and feel the weight of it. Every single penny is a variable in a complex equation of survival. You pull on wool socks with holes in the toes, heavy cotton trousers worn thin at the knees, and a flannel shirt patched at the elbows. Your suspenders were your father's before his factory accident last year. Getting dressed in the 1920s isn't a casual affair. Every piece of clothing has a purpose. Everything is used until it disintegrates, and then it is repurposed again. Pop's already gone, your brother says, lacing up his boots. Night shift at the docks. This is how working families survive in 1921. They work in shifts, a tag team of labor. Your father works nights unloading ships and sleeps during the day. You and your brother work days at the garment factory. Your mother takes in laundry, mending, and any other odd jobs she can find. Your older sister works at Woolworths. The youngest one is still in school, but she won't be for long. At 14, she'll be expected to join the workforce, too. The landlord's knock is a constant worry. He says, $5 or you're out. And you're thinking, $5? That's half my weekly pay. Eviction is a constant threat, a sword of Damocles hanging over every family. There are no tenant protections, no lease agreements for most. Just a weekly envelope of cash and the landlord's mood determining your housing security. You make your way to the main room, where your mother stands at the coal stove, stirring a pot of thick oatmeal. The stove provides the only warmth in the apartment, making this the heart of your home. The air is a mix of coal smoke, coffee, and yesterday's cabbage soup. Did you sleep well? Your mother asks, not looking up. Her hands are red and chapped from washing other people's clothes. She's 43 but looks 60. Fine, you lie. The truth is you were up half the night listening to your father coughing in the next room. The dust from the docks gets in the lungs and never leaves. Breakfast in 1921 is a serious ritual. There's no grabbing a protein bar or stopping at a coffee shop. This meal must fuel hours of hard, physical labor. Your mother ladles the oatmeal into a chipped bowl, adds a sprinkle of sugar, a rare luxury, and pours coffee into a tin cup. The coffee is stretched with chicory to make it last longer. It's bitter but hot. You know those fancy toast places that charge $8 for avocado toast? Yeah, forget it. Your toast is a thick slice of day-old bread, slightly stale, held over the stove grate until it browns, then spread with a scraping of lard. Protein and calories are the currency of survival. Through the window, you can see the street 5 floors below coming alive. A milk wagon rattles past, glass bottles clinking. The milkman's horse leaves steaming deposits on the cobblestones, which kids will dodge on their way to school. A man with a pushcart shouts about hot chestnuts. The newspaper boy is already shouting headlines about prohibition raids. Tony got arrested last night, your sister says, entering from the other bedroom, her hair already pinned up severely for work, caught with a flask at Mancini's place. And here we encounter one of the most bizarre social experiments in American history, prohibition. In January 1920, the government decided alcohol was the root of all evil and banned it completely. Manufacturing, selling, transporting, it was all illegal. Can you imagine the absolute chaos? Picture the government deciding tomorrow that coffee is illegal, or sugar, or bread, something millions of people use every day. What would happen? People wouldn't stop. They'd just get creative. Tony's an idiot, your brother says, wolfing down his oatmeal. Everyone knows Mancini's gets raided on Tuesdays, because that's how prohibition actually worked. It was an elaborate dance between police who needed to show arrests and speakeasies that simply reopened the next day with a new password. The password this week: I'm thirsty. The speakeasy doorman gives you a look. Password, he growls. And you're standing there like, I'm thirsty? Because even the passwords were an open secret. Everyone knew which barbershops had hidden bars, which pharmacies would sell you medicinal whiskey, and which grocery stores had wine grapes with a label that read, warning, will ferment into wine if left in warm place for 3 weeks. You finish breakfast standing up, too rushed to sit. Through the walls, you can hear the Calabrese family's morning argument, the Lewinsky baby crying, and Mrs. O'Connor's morning coughing fit. Privacy doesn't exist in tenement life. Everyone knows everyone's business, their troubles and their joys. Outside, the January air hits you like a slap. The street teems with people, women with shopping baskets, men hurrying to work, and children darting between adults. The air is a complex mix of coal smoke, horse manure, garbage waiting for collection, and the enticing scent of fresh bread from the Italian bakery on the corner. Your breath forms clouds in the frigid air as you and your brother join the river of workers flowing toward the factories. Women in headscarves, men in caps, all moving with a singular purpose. This early, the automobiles are few, mostly delivery trucks bringing goods to shops. The wealthy with their private cars won't be out until later. I'll race you past Scarelli's, your brother says, and you both break into a jog, dodging pedestrians. Physical fitness wasn't a hobby in 1921. It was built into daily life. No one had gym memberships because life itself was a constant workout. You pass the butcher's shop with its window display of cuts most modern Americans wouldn't recognize. You pass the greengrocer where your mother will haggle over bruised vegetables later. You pass Mrs. Finkelstein, who runs the notion shop where your sister buys thread to mend everything endlessly. The garment factory looms ahead. 6 stories of brick with windows that barely open in summer, creating an inferno where you and 500 others work. In winter, like now, those same windows let in drafts that make your fingers so numb you can barely operate the sewing machine. Have you ever had that feeling where you are one paycheck away from disaster? That was Tuesday for most people. No safety net existed, no unemployment insurance, no workers' compensation, no social security. Your boss would simply say, work faster, or someone else will. Because there's always someone hungrier waiting for your job. Waiting at the factory entrance is Mr. Perkins, the floor manager, checking his pocket watch. 2 minutes to whistle, he says, nodding as you pass. Being late means dock pay or worse. Inside, the factory floor stretches out vast and already humming with activity. Rows of sewing machines, pressing stations, and cutting tables fill the space. The air is thick with fabric dust, steam, and the smell of machine oil. Your lungs will feel it by the day's end. The workers are a United Nations assembly. Italian, Jewish, Irish, Polish, Greek, first and second generation immigrants building America, stitch by stitch. English mixes with a dozen other languages in a constant babble beneath the roar of the machines. You take your station at the sewing machine just as the starting whistle blasts. For the next 12 hours, you'll feed fabric through the machine, creating men's shirts sold in fancy department stores for more money than you make in days. Your back will ache, your eyes will strain, and your hands will cramp. The woman beside you, Mrs. Levin, nods. She's 60 if she's a day. Her fingers permanently curved from decades at the machine. My son is engaged, she tells you during a brief lull, to a dentist. The pride in her voice tells the entire immigrant story. The first generation suffers so the second can rise. Lunch break comes after 6 hours. 20 minutes to wolf down the sandwich your mother packed. Bread, a slice of bologna, a pickle if you're lucky. Workers sprawl on crates or lean against walls, too tired to even leave the building. Imagine working without any of the protections we take for granted. No breaks required by law. No safety standards. Fire escape doors are often locked to prevent theft. After the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911 killed 146 workers, some improvements came, but not nearly enough. The afternoon drags on. Your fingers fly on autopilot while your mind wanders. You've made 63 shirt collars so far. The quota is 100 by the end of the day. Fall short 3 days running, and there's someone to take your place. By 4 o'clock, winter darkness has already fallen. The gas lights flicker on, making precision work even harder. Outside the grimy windows, snow begins to fall, adding another worry. Bad weather means streetcar delays, icy sidewalks, and wet feet that lead to cold you can't afford. The cop on the corner looks at your flask and goes, "I didn't see nothing." Because even they knew prohibition was a joke. The police had an impossible job enforcing a law nobody wanted, leading to the first modern era of widespread corruption. Badge by day, speakeasy customer by night. The quitting whistle finally blasts at 7. Your back screams as you straighten. Fingers stiff, cramped claws that slowly uncurl. Around you, hundreds of workers sigh collectively, gathering their belongings and bundling up for the cold journey home. Payday tomorrow, your brother says as you push through the crowd toward the exit. Those are the magic words that make it all worthwhile, or at least bearable. Outside, snow falls thicker now, muffling the city sounds. Gas streetlights create halos in the white air. Your feet crunch along the accumulating snow as you join the exodus home. Some lucky workers board streetcars, paying their nickel fare. You and your brother walk to save the money. Wait, let me back up. Your feet. You're wearing boots with thin soles and leaks where the leather is cracked. Each step in the snow sends a shock of cold up your legs. By the time you reach home, your socks will be wet and your toes numb. Modern waterproof boots with thermal insulation? Pure fantasy. The streets transform in the evening hours. Shops close. Restaurants and social clubs light up. Music drifts from open doors. The new jazz that moral guardians claim is corrupting the youth. On the corner, a newsboy shouts, "President Harding's cabinet announced." Read all about it. And here's something wild. Despite prohibition being barely a year old, you passed 3 speakeasies on your 10-block walk home. You recognize them by the line of cars outside nondescript buildings, the faint sound of jazz, and the bouncer eyeing everyone who approaches. One's disguised as a soda shop, another as a bookstore, and the third doesn't even pretend, just a blank door with a sliding peephole. We should stop at Mancini's, your brother suggests. 1 drink. I got paid for that extra work. This is how most workers cope with the crushing routine. A quick drink before home, a moment of escape. But it's different now, shadowed with the thrill and danger of illegality after what happened to Tony. No way, you answer. Murphy's on Thursday. Because even in speakeasy culture, you had your routine. Different nights, different places. Spreading your illegal business around was just smart. When you finally climbed the 5 flights to your tenement apartment, the smell of cabbage soup greets you. Your mother has stretched yesterday's leftovers, added an onion and potato, and served it with thick slices of bread. It'll fill bellies. Your father is at the table already, looking gray with exhaustion after his night shift. Your sisters set out chip bowls and tin cups. This is dinner in working class 1921. Simple food eaten together. The meal planned around overlapping work schedules. Got a letter from cousin Frank in Chicago. Your father says between spoonfuls. Says there's good work in the stockyards. Better pay than here. And there it is. The constant calculation. Stay or go. Endure known hardships or risk new ones. Mobility wasn't just a luxury in the 1920s. It was a survival strategy. Follow the work. Follow the opportunity. Keep moving to stay ahead of poverty. After dinner, your family's evening ritual unfolds. Your father repairs a chair leg while your mother mends clothes. Your sister reads aloud from the newspaper, one of the Italian dailies, while your younger sister struggles through homework at the table. No private rooms for homework. No quiet study space. Life happens collectively in the two main rooms. Says here, they raided 50 speakeasies last night. Your sister reads, confiscated 500 gallons of liquor. Your father snorts. 500? That's what one night's business uses. And he's right. Prohibition created the first modern criminal underground. It turned ordinary citizens into lawbreakers and corrupted police forces nationwide, all while failing spectacularly at its goal of creating a dry nation. By 9 o'clock, exhaustion catches everyone. Tomorrow is another workday, another alarm clock, another 60 hours of labor stretching ahead. In your comfortable bed right now, you might stay up reading, watching shows, or scrolling through social media. In 1921, sleep was the only affordable luxury. You return to the tiny bedroom, now freezing as the coal stove in the main room burns down for the night. You undress quickly, slide between the cold sheets, pull the thin blankets up, and wait for your body heat to create a small pocket of warmth. Your brother is already in bed, reading a dog-eared pulp magazine by the weak light of a single bulb. Electricity in tenements was still relatively new, unreliable, and expensive, but it was magical compared to gaslighting. Night, he says, switching off the light. In the darkness, you hear the symphony of tenement life. Babies crying, couples arguing, someone playing a violin badly, water pipes knocking, and the L train rumbling 2 blocks away. These sounds are the lullaby of urban 1921. As you drift toward sleep, you wonder what tomorrow will bring. The same, probably, the relentless routine of survival, but also maybe not, because the 1920s were just beginning their roar, and change was coming faster than anyone could imagine. Through the window, snow continues to fall on a New York transformed from just a decade ago. Horse-drawn wagons now share streets with automobiles. Telephones connect businesses. Movies flicker silently in palatial theaters. Women's hemlines creep scandalously upward. And somewhere in Brooklyn, a 6-year-old named Miriam listens to her immigrant parents' dream of a better future for her. In 40 years, she'll be your grandmother, telling you stories of the hardships that seem impossible from the comfort of your modern life. You're falling asleep now, your body aching from work, your mind already calculating tomorrow's survival. But there's also a current of excitement because it's 1921, and America is changing by the minute. Who knows what might be possible by the decade's end? Now let's shift our view. While tenement dwellers in New York fought for survival inch by inch, a different America stretched across the vast countryside. It's 1923 now, and we're waking up on a farm in Iowa, about 100 miles west of Des Moines. The first thing you notice is the silence. No neighbors arguing through thin walls. No streetcars clanging. No factory whistles. Just the distant crow of a rooster and the soft mooing of cows needing to be milked. You're in a wooden farmhouse that your grandfather built with his own hands after claiming this land under the Homestead Act decades ago. You're lying on a feather mattress instead of cotton and springs. The feathers came from your own geese, plucked, washed, and stuffed by your mother and sisters last fall. The sheets are rough cotton but clean, line-dried in yesterday's sunshine. The quilt covering you was made by your grandmother, each square telling a family story in fabric. It's barely 5 a.m., but farm life doesn't care about clocks. Your body knows the rhythm without an alarm. Cows need milking at sunrise no matter what. The wooden floor is cold against your bare feet, but you're used to it. The house is heated by a single wood stove downstairs, meaning upstairs bedrooms stay cold enough in winter to see your breath. "Up, John," your father calls from downstairs. He's been awake for 30 minutes already, stoking the kitchen stove for your mother, who's mixing biscuit dough by the light of a kerosene lamp. "Coming, Pa," you answer, pulling on denim overalls over your long underwear. No shower this morning, or any morning. The farmhouse has no indoor plumbing. There's an outhouse 50 yards behind the kitchen, and a pump at the kitchen sink that brings up cold water from the well. For washing, you splash your face and hands with water from the ceramic basin on your dresser, water that froze a thin skin of ice overnight. Breakfast on a 1923 farm is no quick affair. You need serious calories for the work ahead. Your mother has already cooked a skillet of salt pork. Its fat used to season the cast iron pan, now full of scrambled eggs from your own chickens. Biscuits bake in the oven. Coffee boils in an enamel pot, strong enough to stand a spoon in. "Today's the day," your father says, pouring coffee for himself. His hands are permanently tanned from years in the fields, with calluses as thick as leather. Jenkins is bringing it around noon. Your heart skips a beat. Today's the day your family joins the revolution that's transforming America, automobile ownership. After years of saving, your father is buying a Model T Ford from the dealer in town. You've never owned a car before. Few farm families have, but that's changing fast. "Think it'll make it up the hill to the Petersons?" your mother asks, setting a plate of eggs before you. She's worried about the expense, the practicality. 20 years of horse transportation doesn't shift overnight. Henry Ford didn't become the richest man in America by making things that don't work, your father answers, but there's a note of worry behind his confidence. The Model T costs $290, a fortune for a family that might see actual cash only a few times a year after harvest. Farmers in the 1920s operated largely outside the cash economy most of the time. You produced what you ate. You bartered eggs for sugar at the general store, traded labor with neighbors during harvest, repaired what broke, and made what you needed. Actual dollars were rare and precious. After breakfast, you head to the barn with your father and younger brother. The daily chores wait for no one, car delivery or not. Based on your request, I have rewritten the provided script to be approximately 4,600 words long, while maintaining the original story, theme, and tone. This version expands on descriptions, alters dialogue and phrasing, and adds new details and anecdotes to create a distinct but faithful adaptation. The barn smells of sweet hay, earthy manure, and the warm breath of the cows. Milking 6 dairy cows is a familiar ritual. The rhythmic sound of warm milk hissing into the metal bucket is a sound of peace and survival. Your brother, knee-deep in soiled straw, looks up. "Can I be the first to drive it?" he asks. Your father lets out a chuckle. "Not a chance. Nobody's driving that thing but me until I've got it figured out. It costs more than our entire Southfield." Early car ownership was a brutal learning curve. There was no driver's education, and most rural areas had no licensing requirements. You were given a complicated machine, a few basic instructions, and a lot of trial and error. I spent hours researching manuals for early cars. The 1923 Model T manual offered helpful advice like, to stop the car, first pull the gas lever back to neutral, then apply the brake. Do not become frightened and jump out. The morning passes in a rhythm of chores as old as farming itself. Milk the cows, separate the cream, feed the livestock, gather eggs, mend fences, and check the crops. The work of survival never ends, but there's a strange comfort in its predictability. By 11, you've changed into your town clothes. They aren't fancy, but they are clean denim overalls and a crisp, manure-stain-free shirt. Your mother has on her best dress, the blue one saved for church and special occasions. Even your father has combed his hair and put on a freshly ironed shirt. Hear that? Your brother yells, running in from the porch. It's coming. And then you hear it, the unmistakable, sputtering put-put-put of a Model T engine struggling up the dirt road to your farm. It's the sound of the modern world arriving at your doorstep. The whole family rushes onto the porch, watching as a gleaming black automobile bounces over the ruts of your lane. Mr. Jenkins from the dealership grins behind the wheel, a fine layer of dust coating him from the 12-mile drive from town. "She's a beauty, ain't she?" he calls out, bringing the vehicle to a jerky halt in your yard. Chickens scatter in a panic at this noisy intruder. And she is beautiful. Gleaming black metal, brass headlamps, and a folding top for rain protection. The Model T is a utilitarian vehicle by later standards, designed to handle the brutal rural roads with high clearance and tough suspension. But to your family in 1923, it's nothing short of a miracle. "Can drive her anywhere," Mr. Jenkins says, patting the hood like a favorite horse. 15 horsepower, 20 miles per hour on good roads. 20 miles per hour. The numbers instantly transform your world. The trip to town, 12 miles away, which takes half a day by horse and wagon, suddenly shrinks to a 40-minute jaunt. The county seat, previously a full-day journey, becomes a morning trip. Mr. Jenkins pops the hood to show your father the engine. "Now, starting her takes some practice," he explains. "Got the hand crank here in front. Choke here. Timing advance here. Too much choke, she'll flood. Not enough, won't catch. Timing too advanced. She'll kick back and break your arm." Wait, what? Starting early cars was a dangerous business. The hand crank could snap back and break bones if the timing was wrong. Emergency rooms in the 1920s were full of what doctors called forward fractures. Broken arms, wrists, and thumbs from the cranks kicking back. Your father nods seriously, absorbing every word. This is the most complicated piece of technology your family has ever owned. More complex than the cream separator. More expensive than anything but the farm itself. Now driving is simple enough. Jenkins continues. 3 pedals on the floor. Left is clutch. Press down for low gear. Release halfway for high gear. Middle is reverse. Right is brake. Your father looks concerned. Middle is reverse, not the left. Jenkins laughs. Ford's got his own way of doing things. Different from other makers. You'll get used to it. This was actually true. Early cars had zero standardization. Pedal arrangements, shifting patterns. Even which side of the road to drive on wasn't fully settled in all states yet. Learning to drive one car didn't necessarily prepare you for another. After more instructions, Jenkins has your father sit behind the wheel. Turn the key. Set the gas lever here. Set the spark advance here. Now come around front and give her a crank. Your father follows the directions, grips the crank, and gives it a mighty swing. Nothing. Another swing. Nothing. Bit more choke, Jenkins suggests. On the 3rd try, the engine catches with a roar and a belch of smoke that sends your mother's chickens running for their lives. Your father rushes back to the driver's seat, where Jenkins walks him through the pedals again. Ready for a spin? Jenkins asks. Your father nods, his face set in concentration. The car lurches forward with a jerk, stalls, starts again, lurches forward, and finally picks up speed. Your father's face transforms from worry to wonder as the automobile begins moving smoothly around the farmyard. Want to take her on the road? Jenkins calls out over the engine noise. Your father nods, and the Model T bounces down the lane toward the country road, your father gripping the wheel like it might fly away. You and your brother chase after on foot, whooping with excitement. From the porch, the car disappears around a bend, but you can hear the engine echoing across the cornfields. 10 minutes later, it reappears, your father smiling broadly behind the wheel. The future has arrived at your farm, and nothing will ever be the same. After Jenkins leaves, driven home by your father for his first solo journey, the family crowds around the Model T like it's a spacecraft. Your mother touches the leather seat cautiously. Imagine getting to town in under an hour, she says softly, and you can see her calculating all the ways this will change her life. The isolation of farm women was profound before cars. Visits to town might happen once a month at most. Church on Sundays, if the weather permitted. Otherwise, the farm was your entire world. I can drive to the Peterson place in minutes, your father says, already planning. Borrow that new seed drill without losing a whole day to travel. Your brother crawls underneath, examining the axles and suspension. How fast do you think it really goes, Pa? We'll find out tomorrow, your father promises. First, I need to figure out how to drive the darn thing properly. And figure it out he does, though not without incident. That first month of car ownership brings a new vocabulary into your family's life. Words like carburetor, distributor, and flat tire become regular topics at the dinner table. There's the memorable afternoon your father drives into the yard too fast and sideswipes the water trough, denting the fender. There's the Sunday your whole family dresses for church, piles into the car, and makes it exactly 2 miles before a tire blows out. Your father changes it in his good suit, sweating and swearing under his breath while your mother pretends not to hear. The new tire from the dealer costs $4, which, as your father laments, is 3 days' wages for a farmhand. The ongoing costs of car ownership shocked many first-time buyers. It wasn't just the purchase price. It was tires, gasoline, oil, and repairs. A whole new category of expenses for families who previously fed their transportation with hay they grew themselves. But there are glorious moments, too. The first time your family drives to town for supplies and makes the round trip in a single morning instead of a full day. The Sunday you drive 20 miles to visit cousins you previously saw only at Christmas because of the travel difficulty. The night your mother goes into town for a women's club meeting and comes home after dark. Something impossible in the horse and buggy days. The car changes everything. Suddenly your map expands. The farm is no longer an island in a sea of distance. Town becomes an easy destination, not a journey requiring planning. Neighbors 5 miles away become people you can visit on a whim. By summer, your father has mastered the Model T completely. You and your brother have learned to drive too, at least enough to move it around the farmyard or drive the short distance to the main road. Your mother still refuses to try, claiming she has no head for machinery, but you've seen her eyeing the wheel when she thinks no one's looking. The car enables new freedoms, but it also leads to new family negotiations. Who gets the car when, and for what purpose? Your sister wants to drive to town for a motion picture show. Your brother wants to take it fishing at the creek. Your father needs it for farm business. The single vehicle becomes a shared resource requiring complex family diplomacy. We need rules. Your mother announces at dinner one night after 3 separate car usage disputes. Church on Sundays, market days for supplies, farm business first, social calls only when work's done. Farm business included things modern folks might not consider, like getting a sick animal to the vet, hauling cream to the dairy station before it spoiled, or bringing home a new breeding animal. One farmer's diary I found mentioned driving 80 miles round trip to purchase a particular bull for his dairy herd, a journey that would have taken days before cars. The greatest transformation comes in autumn. Harvest time, always the most critical and stressful season, changes with automobile ownership. If a part breaks on the threshing machine, your father drives to town and returns with replacements in 2 hours instead of losing a whole day. When you need extra hands for harvesting, he drives to town and brings back day laborers. If there's a bumper crop ready for market, multiple trips become possible in a single day. The car also connects your family to the wider changes sweeping America. Driving to the county seat, you see more automobiles each visit. The dirt roads designed for horses and wagons are being graded more frequently to accommodate car traffic. There's talk of paving some major routes. Your father, no more buying gasoline in cans from the general store. Gas stations, car dealerships, and repair shops. Whole new categories of business spring up to serve the automobile culture. Roads improve, bridges strengthen, and the landscape itself transforms to accommodate this revolution on wheels. By Christmas 1923, your family's Model T seems as essential as the plow or the stove. When snow blankets the farm and your father puts the car up on blocks in the barn for the winter, early cars weren't great in snow, and many rural families didn't use them in winter. There's a sense of loss, of returning to an isolation you'd briefly escaped. The car sits idle through the deep winter months, but plans form around it. Your father pores over maps, plotting spring journeys previously unimaginable. Your mother talks of visiting her sister in the next county, a trip that previously required an overnight stay. Your older sister, home from normal school for the holidays, speaks of perhaps living in town and driving home on weekends once she starts teaching. Mobility breeds possibility. The car shrinks distance and expands horizons simultaneously. For your family and millions like you, the automobile isn't just a convenience. It's freedom in steel and rubber form. On Christmas Eve, sitting by lamplight, rural electrification is still years away for most farms. Your grandfather tells tales of his youth, crossing half the country by covered wagon, establishing the homestead. The isolation of those early years. Took 3 days to get to town when I first settled here, he says, shaking his head at the changes he's witnessed. And you can do it before lunch. This compression of time and space is the real revolution of the 1920s. The world simultaneously grows larger in reach and smaller in effort. America's vast distances, once barriers to connection, begin to shrink beneath rubber tires. When spring finally softens the land, your father reverses the winterizing process, checking the Model T carefully before taking it down from the blocks. The first drive of the new season feels like a rebirth, the farm reconnecting to the wider world after months of winter isolation. By now, the novelty has worn off, but the wonder hasn't. Each time the engine rumbles to life, each mile that passes beneath the wheels represents a freedom previous generations could barely imagine. Your grandparents measured travel in days and weather conditions. You measure it in hours and gallons of gasoline. And as your family's Model T bounces down country roads, it joins a growing river of vehicles, transforming America mile by mile. By decade's end, the country will have more than 23 million registered automobiles, one for every 5 Americans. The nation itself is being rewired around this invention. Its geography is rewritten in routes accessible by car. The automobile doesn't just change how you travel. It changes where you go, who you see, what you do, what you buy, and where you might live or work. It reshapes your relationship with time, distance, community, and possibility. And it's just one of the revolutions remaking America in the roaring decade of the 1920s. It's 1925 now, and we're in Millerville, a small town of about 2,500 people, nestled between rolling hills in western Pennsylvania. Not a big city like New York, not isolated farmland like Iowa, but something in between. The quintessential American small town where modern life and traditional values collide in fascinating ways. You wake up in a modest two-story home on Elm Street, just 3 blocks from Maine. Unlike the tenement apartment or the isolated farmhouse, this bedroom is yours alone, a luxury of middle-class life. The bed has a proper metal frame, a store-bought mattress, and a colorful quilt your mother ordered from the Sears catalog. Morning light filters through cotton curtains as you stretch beneath warm blankets. Outside your window, you can hear birds chirping, the occasional automobile puttering past, and the distant whistle of the 7:15 train arriving at the station. The house smells of coffee and bacon. Unlike city dwellers crammed in tenements or farmers isolated on distant homesteads, your family represents the growing American middle class. Not wealthy, but comfortable. Your father works as the manager at the town's hardware store. Your mother, unusually for married women in 1925, keeps the books for the same business. Your bedroom contains treasures that mark you as a teenager in this transitional decade. A small collection of photograph records stacked beside a hand-cranked Victrola player, movie magazine clippings of Clara Bow and Rudolph Valentino pinned to the wall, a crystal radio set you built yourself from a kit ordered through Popular Mechanics. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, your feet hitting a proper rug instead of bare boards. The house has modern conveniences your city and country counterparts might envy. Indoor plumbing with a bathroom shared by the family. Electric lights in most rooms. A telephone in the hallway downstairs. Not every house in town has these things yet, but they're spreading rapidly as America's prosperity grows. Breakfast, Sarah. Your mother calls from downstairs. You can hear the radio playing in the kitchen. A morning news program from Pittsburgh. The announcer's voice is a little tinny, but clearly audible. The radio, not the automobile, sits at the heart of your family's modern life. I spent way too long researching early radio models for this. Did you know the first commercial radio station, KDKA in Pittsburgh, only started broadcasting in 1920? By 1925, America had over 500 stations, and radio was transforming from a novelty to a necessity. Downstairs, your family gathers around a proper dining table in a room dedicated just to eating, another middle-class luxury. Your father sits with the newspaper propped against the sugar bowl. Your mother places a plate of eggs and bacon before you, and your younger brother fiddles with the radio dial, trying to improve reception. "Don't touch that," your father says without looking up from his paper. "I want to hear the market report." The radio on the sideboard is the pride of your household, a new Atwater Kent model with 5 tubes and a proper wooden cabinet. No more headphones or crystal sets. This is a genuine piece of furniture that delivers entertainment directly into your home. It cost nearly $80, 2 weeks of your father's salary, but he considers it an investment, not a luxury. There's a new Harold Lloyd picture at the Rialto tonight, your brother says, passing you the toast rack. "Can we go?" Movies, the other great mass media revolution, have already transformed from a novelty to regular entertainment. Millerville has 2 movie theaters, the older Bijou and the newer, fancier Rialto with actual upholstered seats and electric fans for summer cooling. Test scores first. Your mother answers, but her tone suggests permission is likely. Unlike earlier generations, your parents view commercial entertainment as normal, even beneficial. The motion picture industry has worked hard to shed its slightly disreputable early image, promoting films as educational and wholesome family entertainment. Your father lowers his paper. Says here, Coolidge is speaking on the radio tonight. national hookup. He says this with genuine wonder. The president's voice coming directly into your living room. The miracle hasn't grown stale yet. For context, President Calvin Coolidge was nicknamed Silent Cal because he was so reserved. But even this quiet president embraced radio immediately. Like most politicians, he recognized its power to bypass newspapers and speak directly to voters. Radio made national politics immediate and personal in ways print never could. After breakfast, you head downtown with your brother to run errands before school. Main Street bustles with morning activity. Mr. Peterson unlocks his pharmacy. Mrs. Winters sweeps the sidewalk in front of her millinery shop. The mailman delivers packages to the general store. Unlike the anonymous city or the isolated farm, small-town life means being known. "Morning, Sarah," calls Mr. Peterson. "Tell your mother her headache powder came in." 3 people greet you by name before you reach the corner. This interconnectedness defines small-town existence, comforting or stifling, depending on your perspective. You pass the Rialto Theater, where the marquee indeed advertises Harold Lloyd and the Freshman. A colorful poster shows the bespectacled comedian hanging from a clock face. Movie marketing is sophisticated already, with nationwide advertising campaigns, fan magazines, and merchandise. The movie star system is in full flower, creating the first modern celebrities, known as intimately as family members despite never being met in person. "Think Clara Bow will ever come to Millerville?" your brother asks, staring at another poster showing the famous It girl in a revealing costume. "Dream on." You laugh. Small towns might get the same movies as big cities, but actual movie stars exist in another universe. At the newsstand, you spend your allowance on the latest issue of Photoplay, a movie magazine promising exclusive interviews with the stars. Inside are glossy photos of the famous faces you and millions of other Americans collectively adore. Chaplin, Fairbanks, Pickford, Swanson. Their hairstyles will be copied, their clothing imitated, their romances analyzed by people who've never been to Hollywood and never will go. The theater manager passes by, tips his hat. "Coming tonight?" "Lloyd's a scream in this one." "Hope to, Mr. Daniels," you answer, "if homework allows." He winks. Special display in the lobby. An actual football from the movie studio, sent as promotion. This national marketing for local consumption represents the new media landscape. Products, promotions, and publicity flow from centers of production to the smallest towns, creating shared cultural touchstones. A joke told in a Harold Lloyd film will be repeated in schoolyards from Maine to California. Americans increasingly laugh at the same things, cry at the same stories, and worry about the same news. School occupies the middle of your day. A consolidated high school serving Millerville and the surrounding farms. Unlike your parents' one-room schoolhouse education, yours features specialized teachers, a science laboratory, and even a small gymnasium. Education is changing, too, becoming more standardized across America as mass media and improved transportation connect previously isolated systems. It's after school that the real center of teenage social life in 1925 emerges, Miller's Drugstore, with its soda fountain, booths, and, most importantly, its Victrola player. Miller's is where Millerville's youth gather to socialize in ways their parents never experienced. 2 cherry phosphates, your friend Helen orders at the counter. The soda jerk, college boy home for the summer, nods knowingly. "Heard the new Armstrong record?" he asks, gesturing to the stack of records beside the Victrola. "Hot stuff." The store has a commercial arrangement with Victor Records. They sell records, but also play them as promotion. For the price of a soda, teens can listen to the latest jazz and dance music, much to the concern of some parents who view jazz as dangerously sensual and modern. My dad says jazz is causing moral decay. Helen sighs, rolling her eyes. Put it on. The music that fills the drugstore would shock earlier generations with its syncopated rhythms and improvisational style. But to you and your friends, it's simply the soundtrack of youth. Louis Armstrong's trumpet soars above the scratchy recording, creating a sound unlike anything your parents grew up hearing. Teenage culture in the 1920s was becoming distinct for the first time, shaped by commercial entertainment rather than traditional community values. Parents worried while teenagers embraced new music, new dances, and new fashion spread by mass media. Dashiell Hammett, supplies Helen, who devours detective stories. Radio created shared national experiences impossible in previous eras. The next day after a popular program, Americans everywhere discussed the same episodes, quoted the same lines, and laughed at the same jokes. Regional isolation began dissolving in a sea of standardized entertainment. My folks got a new radiola, Edward boasts. 6 tubes. Dad let me stay up for the fight broadcast from New York. Heard Dempsey get knocked out in real time. Sports broadcasting nationalized athletics, turning local teams into national obsessions and athletes into celebrities. Before radio, you might read about a boxing match the next day. Now, you could hear it as it happened, the announcer's excitement making you feel present at events occurring hundreds of miles away. Wouldn't miss it, Helen answers. Sarah's teaching me the Charleston. The boy from the pharmacy looks at you. You know the Charleston for real. Because even in small towns, the dance crazes that swept urban areas eventually arrived, sometimes months after they had already peaked in New York or Chicago. But they arrived nonetheless, carried by movies, magazines, photograph records, and travelers. You demonstrate few Charleston steps beside the booth, exaggerating the swinging arms and twisted knees that scandalize parents and delight teens. The dance's energetic abandon perfectly captures the spirit of the decade, modern, rebellious, carefree. As afternoon stretches toward evening, you head home for dinner, stopping by the hardware store to walk home with your father. The store itself is another symbol of changing times. Traditional tools still occupy prominent space, but new sections cater to automobile owners, radio enthusiasts, and home modernization. Look what just came in, your father says proudly, showing you a display of electric toasters. Future of home appliances right there. Consumer culture was exploding in the 1920s as electrification spread and mass production made previously luxurious items affordable to the middle class. Advertising in magazines, newspapers, and radio created desire for products people hadn't known they needed. The modern consumer was being born. Dinner at home follows middle-class rituals unchanged for decades. Proper place settings, serving dishes passed around the table, conversation about the day's events. But tonight's normalcy is interrupted by the radio in the living room. Hurry up, your father urges, checking his pocket watch. President speaking in 15 minutes. National broadcast. After dishes are cleared, your family settles in the living room. Your father in his armchair directly facing the radio. Your mother in her rocker with mending. You and your brother on the sofa. The radio glows warmly as the tubes heat up, emitting a soft hum before voices emerge. This is Graham McNamee speaking to you from Washington, D.C., where President Coolidge will address the nation on the state of the economy. Your father shushes everyone, though no one is speaking. The room falls silent as the president's distinctive New England accent fills your Pennsylvania living room. The moment feels profound. The nation's leader speaking simultaneously to millions of citizens in their private homes. Imagine going from a world where you might never hear the president speak unless he visited your town to one where his voice regularly entered your living room. The psychological impact was enormous. Political leadership became both more intimate and more polished as radio required new skills from public figures. After the speech, your family discusses the president's points about the booming economy. Your father, a Republican like most small business managers, approves of Coolidge's pro-business stance. Your mother, with more progressive leanings, has reservations. What matters isn't their disagreement, but that they both heard exactly the same speech at exactly the same time as millions of other Americans, a shared national moment impossible before radio. Can we go to the movies now? Your brother asks as the post-speech analysis drones on. Your father checks his watch. 8 o'clock showing. Be home by 10 o'clock. The walk to the Rialto takes you down Main Street, which is transformed by evening. Shop windows glow with electric lights. Cars line the curb outside the hotel where traveling salesmen stay. The ice cream parlor bustles, with couples and families enjoying an evening treat. The movie theater marquee shines like a beacon, bulbs outlining the freshmen in electric glory. Outside, a crowd gathers. Farm families in town for the evening. Factory workers still in work clothes. High school students giggling in groups. Young couples using the darkened theater for modest courtship. Inside, the lobby dazzles with gilt paint, patterned carpet, and a refreshment stand selling candy and popcorn. Movie theaters were designed as palaces of escape, their ornate architecture offering ordinary people a taste of luxury for the price of admission. 25 cents for adults, 15 for children. The football from the film sits in a glass case, surrounded by promotional stills showing Harold Lloyd in various comic predicaments. A cardboard cutout of the star grins manically as patrons pose beside it for fun. 2, please, you tell the ticket seller, sliding coins across the counter. Your weekly allowance disappears, but the expense seems worthwhile for 2 hours of entertainment more elaborate than anything previous generations could imagine. The theater interior impresses, with red velvet curtains covering the screen, painted ceiling murals depicting classical scenes, and even small electric lights lining the aisles. No modern multiplex can match the opulent movie palaces of the 1920s, designed to transport ordinary people into worlds of fantasy before the film even began. As the lights dim, an organist begins playing at the theater's prized Wurlitzer. Unlike metropolitan movie palaces with full orchestras, small-town theaters made do with a single musician. Still, the organ's rich tones fill the space, setting the mood for entertainment. First comes a newsreel showing world events: the Prince of Wales touring Africa, floods in Mississippi, a fashion show in Paris. For many in the audience, especially from outlying farms, these newsreels provide their only visual connection to world events. Before television, this was video journalism, powerfully immediate compared to newspaper accounts. Next, a cartoon featuring Felix the cat bounces across the screen, eliciting laughs from children and adults alike. Animation was already sophisticated by 1925, with established characters and consistent styles that audiences recognized and anticipated. Finally, the main feature begins. Silent, of course. The jazz singer, with synchronized sound, is still 2 years away. Title cards provide dialogue and narration, but the storytelling is primarily visual, relying on exaggerated expressions and physical comedy that requires no translation. The audience reacts as one, laughing, gasping, occasionally applauding particularly impressive stunts. This collective experience represents another way mass media united Americans. Millions would see this exact film, react to the same moments, and discuss the same scenes afterward. You lose yourself in the story, worries temporarily forgotten in the flickering images. This escapism is precisely what made movies so popular during economic hardship or social change. For the price of admission, Anyone could step into different lives, different worlds. Afterward, walking home through the quiet streets of Millerville, you and your brother quote favorite scenes and imitate Lloyd's pratfalls. The shared experience creates an immediate connection, common reference points, and an increasingly standardized national culture. At home, your parents are listening to a dance orchestra program on the radio, the music softly filling the house. Your mother looks up from her book. "Good picture," she asks. "Hilarious," your brother answers, launching into a detailed description of the football game scene. You head upstairs to your room, your mind still full of movie images. Before bed, you tune your crystal radio set with headphones, carefully adjusting the wire on the crystal to catch distant stations. Unlike the family's console radio downstairs, this private listening device lets you explore the airwaves independently. Past your bedtime, headphones on, you listen to jazz from Pittsburgh, a hotel orchestra from Cleveland, and fragments of voices from Chicago fading in and out with atmospheric conditions. The radio collapses distance in the darkness, bringing the wider world to your small-town bedroom. Lying in bed, you consider how different your life is from your parents' adolescence just 20 years earlier. They grew up in relative isolation, their entertainment locally produced, their horizons limited by physical distance. You inhabit a world where national media create shared experiences across thousands of miles, where movie stars and radio personalities feel like familiar friends, and where cultural trends spread from coast to coast in weeks instead of years, or not at all. Your room contains the evidence of this transformation: movie magazines, phonograph records, and radio equipment. Each represents a thread connecting you to a wider America, weaving previously separate communities into a more uniform national culture. The voices on your radio fade as stations sign off for the night. This is KDKA Pittsburgh signing off until 6 a.m. Good night, and God bless America. In the silence that follows, you drift toward sleep, your imagination full of images from movies, your head still nodding to remember jazz rhythms. Tomorrow will bring more local experiences, school, chores, face-to-face conversations with friends and neighbors. But increasingly, these local experiences exist within a framework of national media that shapes expectations, creates shared references, and connects even the smallest towns to American culture at large. As radio signals cross your sleeping town, carrying music, news, and stories to thousands of other communities, America becomes more itself, diverse yet increasingly unified, traditional yet embracing modernity, physically dispersed yet culturally connected in ways no previous generation could have imagined. We've seen working-class struggles in New York, rural transformation in Iowa, and middle-class life in small-town Pennsylvania. But to understand the full spectrum of 1920s America, we need to step into another world entirely. The rarefied air of wealth during the decade that birthed the term, the rich get richer. It's 1927 now, and you're waking up in a bedroom larger than some entire tenement apartments. Sunlight filters through silk curtains onto a bed that cost more than a Model T Ford. You're in Lake Forest, Illinois, one of America's wealthiest suburbs, situated on Lake Michigan, just north of Chicago. This isn't just wealth, it's American aristocracy. Your eyes open to a room designed by a prominent New York decorator. Hand-painted Chinese wallpaper covers walls hung with original oil paintings. A Persian carpet cushions your feet when you slide from the bed. The sheets are Egyptian cotton, changed daily by housemaids you rarely see. The room is warm despite the winter chill outside. Central heating keeps the entire 24-room mansion at a perfect 72 degrees. Through large windows, you can see snow dusting the formal gardens that stretch toward the lake. The grounds cover 12 acres, maintained year-round by a staff of 6 gardeners. Unlike the tenement dweller, the farmer, or the small-town teen, your morning doesn't begin with immediate chores or work preparation. Instead, a discreet knock at the door signals your lady's maid, Louise, arriving with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Miss Catherine," she says, setting the silver tray on a bedside table. "Mrs. Harrington requests your presence at 11 for the charity committee meeting." You nod sleepily, reaching for the delicate porcelain cup filled with perfectly brewed coffee. Louise moves efficiently around the room, opening curtains wider, laying out clothes for the day, and gathering yesterday's discarded silk stockings for laundering. "The blue Chanel or the green Poirette for luncheon?" she asks, holding up two dresses that each cost more than 6 months' salary for most Americans. "The blue, I think," you answer. "Is father at breakfast?" you inquire. "Mr. Harrington left for Chicago on the 7:30 train," Louise informs you. "He mentioned a board meeting at the bank." I spent hours researching how the ultra-wealthy lived in the 1920s. Think real-life Great Gatsby stuff. The income gap was staggering. The top 1% owned about 40% of all wealth, and they weren't shy about showing it. Louise draws your bath in a bathroom that would astound most Americans. It has marble floors heated from below, a sunken tub large enough for two, gold-plated fixtures, and a shower with multiple heads. Still a rarity even in wealthy homes. This level of bathroom luxury was unprecedented. As you soak in scented water, you contemplate your day. A charity committee in the morning, luncheon with your mother's friends, a tennis lesson. The family has private indoor courts, then dinner with potential suitors your parents have approved. At 20, you're already slightly behind the marriage curve for your social set. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the servants' wing, another day has been underway for hours. The Harrington household employs 18 domestic staff, a butler, housekeeper, cook, kitchen maids, housemaids, footmen, a chauffeur, ladies' maids, and others. They rose before dawn to prepare the house and family for another day of conspicuous leisure. In the vast kitchen, Mrs. Collins, the cook, directs 2 kitchen maids in dinner preparations that will take all day. "The fish must be absolutely fresh," she insists to a delivery boy from Chicago's finest market. Mr. Harrington can tell the difference. The kitchen is industrially sized but state-of-the-art, with electric refrigeration, not just an icebox, multiple ovens, a dedicated pastry area, and specially designed storage for the different sets of dishes for different meals and occasions mean the kitchen contains more plates than some department stores. James, the butler, confers with Mrs. Collins about wine selections for dinner. "Mr. Harrington wants the 21 Bordeaux with the main course," he says. Despite prohibition being the law of the land, fine wine flows freely in wealthy households. The very rich were effectively exempt from liquor laws that criminalized average Americans. The Harrington family never even pretended to obey prohibition. Their wine cellar, hidden behind a false wall as a minimal concession to legality, contains vintages worth more than most Americans earn in years. When they entertain, champagne flows as though the 18th Amendment never passed. The florist called. Mrs. Mitchell, the housekeeper, tells James, "The orchids for tonight's centerpiece are delayed. Shall I have them use roses instead?" James looks pained. Mrs. Harrington specifically requested orchids to complement the new Limoges service. This level of detail and household management wasn't unusual for America's upper class. Every aspect of domestic life was curated, from fresh flowers daily to perfectly pressed linens to seasonally rotated art and furnishings. The butler checks his watch, a solid gold timepiece, gifted by Mr. Harrington last Christmas. The silver still needs polishing for tonight. Have Thomas and William see to it immediately. while the household staff rushes to prepare for an intimate dinner party. Only 16 guests tonight, practically casual by Harrington standards. You've finished your bath. Louise helps you dress in layers typical for wealthy women. Silk undergarments, a lightweight corset. Fashion still demanded certain silhouettes. Silk stockings held by garters, a slip, and finally, the blue Chanel day dress. Your closet would stagger most Americans, with dozens of dresses, suits, coats, and specialized outfits for every conceivable activity, from riding to tennis to yachting. The concept of appropriate dress reaches a religious intensity among the wealthy. Wearing evening clothes before 6 p.m. or country clothes in town would cause more scandal than political radicalism. Mrs. Harrington purchased tickets for the Symphony Friday. Louise mentions while styling your hair. She asked me to remind you that the Abbott's son will be joining your box. Matchmaking remains a primary maternal occupation, even in 1927. Despite the decade's reputation for liberation, upper-class marriage still functions partially as a business merger and social positioning. The Abbotts own railroads, your father owns banks. The match makes financial sense. I read a wild account from a society columnist who described a debutante ball where they released live birds painted gold as decoration. The things wealth made seem reasonable were truly bizarre. Downstairs, you find your mother in the morning room, a sunny space overlooking the winter gardens. Eleanor Harrington, at 45, remains a stunning woman, maintained by rigorous beauty regimens, regular spa visits, and the confident posture of someone who has never worried about money. Catherine Darling, she greets you, barely looking up from the correspondence she's reviewing. The Blakely girl is engaged, the third this season. We really must focus on your prospects. Your mother writes with a gold fountain pen on personalized stationery. Her morning activity includes answering invitations, directing household matters, and managing her extensive social obligations. Though she doesn't work in any traditional sense, her role in maintaining family status through social connections is taken extremely seriously. The charity committee meets at 11, she continues. We're finalizing plans for the children's hospital benefit. I've committed us to purchasing 2 tables at $500 each. The irony of spending lavishly on charity events wasn't lost on everyone. One socialite supposedly said, "We spent $15,000 on a party to raise $10,000 for the poor, but the party was so lovely." A housemaid appears silently with fresh coffee. Your mother continues reviewing her social calendar without acknowledging the servant's presence. This invisibility of staff represents another aspect of wealthy life. Domestic workers exist in a parallel universe, physically present but socially non-existent. The Morgans have invited us to Palm Beach next month, your mother says. I've instructed Louise to begin packing your resort clothes. We'll take the private car on the 20th. The private car refers to the family's personal railroad car, attached to regular trains, but offering completely private accommodations. Commercial air travel barely exists in 1927, so wealthy families travel by private rail car, essentially mobile luxury apartments coupled to regular trains. Your father enters, having returned unexpectedly from Chicago. Howard Harrington made his first million before 30, multiplied it through banking, and now, at 50, serves on numerous corporate boards while managing family investments. His tailored suit, handmade shoes, and perfectly trimmed mustache project success and authority. "Market's up again," he announces, accepting coffee from the hovering maid. "Those aircraft manufacturers I mentioned, stock jumped 12 points yesterday." The stock market dominates wealthy conversation in 1927. The unprecedented bull market seems unstoppable, creating paper millionaires daily. Investment tips exchanged like currency at dinner parties and golf clubs. Should we buy more? Your mother asks, revealing that even society women follow financial markets closely. Already instructed Harrison to purchase another 1,000 shares. Your father replies, this boom has legs. Of course, with hindsight, we know the crash lurks just 2 years away. But in 1927, optimism borders on delusion among the investing class. The market can only go up. Prosperity will never end, many economists claimed. America has entered a permanent plateau of prosperity. After breakfast, you join your mother in the library with a charity committee. 8 women from prominent Chicago families gathers to plan a hospital benefit expected to raise $50,000. The meeting perfectly encapsulates upper-class women's lives. Genuine charitable impulses filtered through social competition and status display. The Palmers have donated an automobile as the grand prize, announces Mrs. Winthrop, the committee chair. We must ensure ticket prices are high enough to maintain exclusivity. The women discuss dinner menus, orchestras, table arrangements, and decorations with the seriousness of military strategists. While they genuinely want to support the children's hospital, the event's success will be measured equally by its social prestige and press coverage. Catherine, Mrs. Winthrop addresses you. We'd like you to chair the junior committee. Get those eligible bachelors to open their wallets. This represents your growing social responsibility. Young people of your class must begin demonstrating philanthropic leadership. It's part of the unwritten curriculum of wealth. After the committee departs, you have a few hours before luncheon. Unlike most Americans, your time is largely discretionary. You spend it practicing piano on the Steinway Grand in the music room, one of many accomplishments expected of wealthy young women. Though the jazz age celebrates more liberated female behavior, traditional expectations still govern upper-class womanhood. As one society lady supposedly quipped, "Oh, I don't work. I merely oversee the staff, manage social engagements, run 3 charity boards, speak 3 languages, and can play Chopin from memory." Because wealthy women's labor was never called work, even when it was complex and demanding. At 1 o'clock, your mother's luncheon guests arrive, 6 women from prominent Chicago families. The dining room gleams with silver and crystal for what is considered an informal meal, though it would outshine most Americans' wedding dinners. Housemaids in black uniforms with white aprons serve course after course, while remaining functionally invisible to the diners. Conversation touches on mutual friends, upcoming social events, European travel plans, and eventually, current events. Even here, the new mass media makes its presence felt. "Did you hear President Coolidge on the radio last night?" asks Mrs. Forrester, whose husband owns a department store. Harold says his business policies are precisely what America needs. The Lindbergh flight is all anyone discusses in New York, contributes Mrs. Astor, who recently returned from Manhattan. They're planning a ticker-tape parade when he returns. Charles Lindbergh's solo flight across the Atlantic in May 1927 represents another media milestone, the first global celebrity created entirely through mass communication. His handsome face appears everywhere, from newspapers to magazine covers to movie newsreels. The flight itself lasted 33 hours, but the media sensation continued for months. "Catherine, didn't you meet the Lindbergh boy at the Wetmore party last year?" Your mother asks, creating a social connection to the news sensation. Briefly, you acknowledge, though the encounter was merely a passing introduction at a crowded event. Still, social capital comes from proximity to fame and prominence. After luncheon, you have your tennis lesson in the family's indoor court, followed by a massage from the personal masseuse who visits twice weekly. Physical fitness and beauty maintenance occupy significant time for wealthy women, though the purpose remains attractiveness rather than health. As evening approaches, Louise helps you prepare for dinner. This involves another bath, a complete hair restyling, and changing into formal evening wear. A beaded Lanvin gown imported from Paris, satin evening slippers, and family jewelry from the safe. Mr. Abbott's son will be seated beside you, Louise mentions while fastening a pearl necklace worth more than her lifetime earnings. Mrs. Harrington suggested the emerald earrings as well. Downstairs, the transformation is complete. The dining room now glows with candelabra, fine china, and crystal. Footmen in formal livery stand ready behind each chair. James supervises with eagle-eyed attention to detail. Fresh flowers perfume the air. The setting could be a royal palace rather than a private home. Guests arrive in chauffeur-driven luxury automobiles, Packets, Cadillacs, Rolls-Royces. The women drip with jewels. The men wear impeccably tailored evening clothes. Air kisses exchange. Cocktails circulate. Prohibition remains an inconvenience rather than an obstacle, and conversation bubbles with practiced charm. Mr. Abbott's son, Robert, does indeed sit beside you at dinner. A Yale graduate with perfect manners and practiced conversation. His family's railroad fortune would combine nicely with your banking background. The matchmaking is obvious, but conducted with sufficient subtlety to maintain dignity. "Do you enjoy the symphony, Miss Harrington?" he inquires over soup served in antique Sèvres porcelain bowls. "I particularly enjoy Debussy," you reply with appropriate cultural knowledge, though I found Stravinsky's piece last season quite stimulating. The dinner conversation floats through safe topics: music, theater, travel, and mutual acquaintances. Politics rarely intrudes in mixed company, though most present share conservative Republican views aligned with their financial interests. Labor unrest, immigration concerns, and prohibition enforcement affect their businesses, but not their daily lives. Wine flows freely despite federal law, served from crystal decanters rather than original bottles, a minimal nod to illegality. The meal stretches to 7 courses, each more elaborate than the last, representing days of kitchen preparation for a 3-hour dining experience. After dinner, the men briefly separate for cigars and port while the women retire to the drawing room. This Victorian custom persists in upper-class households despite the decades' more relaxed social standards. When the groups rejoin, entertainment follows. A famous pianist has been engaged to play for the intimate gathering. By midnight, the party concludes. Chauffeurs return from their waiting positions to collect guests. You bid goodnight to Robert Abbott with appropriate restraint, though his invitation to join his family's box at the races next weekend suggests mutual interest. As the last guests depart, the household staff springs into action again. Despite the late hour, silver must be washed and counted, china returned to storage, linens laundered, and floors cleaned. For the wealthy, the day ends with rest. For those who maintain their lifestyle, hours of work remain. In your room, Louise helps you undress, removing jewelry to the safe, hanging the beaded gown, and carefully untangling your hair from diamond clips. The day's social performance is complete. You can finally relax. "Will there be anything else, Miss Catherine?" Louise asks, folding your evening gloves. "No, thank you, Louise. Good night." Alone, you slip between fresh sheets changed during dinner. Your windows offer a view of Lake Michigan, moonlight silvering the winter waves. In the distance, Chicago glows with electric light, the city that generates your family's fortune. Before sleep claims you, you consider your position, privileged beyond most Americans' imaginations, insulated from hardship by wealth accumulated across generations, and expected to maintain and expand that privilege through strategic marriage and social compliance. The freedom of the jazz age touches even gilded cages, but expectations remain. As you drift towards sleep in your mansion bedroom, other Americans do the same in tenements, farmhouses, and small-town homes. The single nation contains these parallel worlds, connected increasingly by mass media, but separated by wealth disparities that the Roaring Twenties has only widened. Let's hit the road. It's 1928, and America is on the move like never before. While the wealthy enjoy their mansions and the middle class embraces radio culture, the entire nation is being physically rewired by a transportation revolution that's shrinking distances and expanding horizons. You're waking up in a Pullman sleeping compartment on the 20th Century Limited, the most famous passenger train in America, currently speeding through the night somewhere in Ohio. The gentle rocking of the rail car and the rhythmic clickety-clack of wheels on the track seep into your dreams before your eyes open. Your narrow berth is surprisingly comfortable. The Pullman Company has perfected the art of luxury in a minimal space. Heavy green curtains separate you from the aisle where other passengers sleep in similar compartments. Outside your window, darkness still covers the landscape, occasionally broken by the lights of small towns flashing past at 80 miles per hour. The pocket watch on your small fold-down table shows 5:30 a.m. You're a journalist for Collier's magazine, working on a special feature called America in Motion: How Transportation is Changing the Nation. Your editor has given you an enviable assignment: travel coast to coast, using every modern transportation method available in 1928, documenting how mobility is transforming the country. You started in New York yesterday, boarding this famous train at Grand Central Terminal. The 20th Century Limited isn't just transportation, it's a rolling legend. The boarding process alone was theatrical, with red carpets literally rolled out for passengers, the origin of the phrase, red carpet treatment. Porters in crisp uniforms handled luggage, and the train's gleaming, streamlined exterior promised speed and luxury. I spent weeks researching the legendary trains of this era. The 20th Century Limited was basically a five-star hotel on wheels, complete with barbers, manicurists, stenographers, and gourmet dining. The ultimate status symbol wasn't just getting there. It was how you traveled. A gentle knock on your compartment door signals, "You're Porter George." "Good morning, sir. We'll be arriving in Chicago in approximately 2 hours. Would you care for coffee while you dress?" George, like all Pullman porters, is black. The Pullman Company is the largest single employer of African Americans in the country. Though the work involves catering to wealthy white travelers' every need for minimal wages, supplemented by tips. Despite these conditions, Pullman jobs remain coveted positions within the limited opportunities available to black workers in 1928. "Coffee would be wonderful, George." "Thank you." As George disappears to fetch your coffee, you begin the somewhat complicated process of preparing for the day in a moving train compartment the size of a closet. Your berth converts ingeniously from a bed to a sitting room with hidden compartments for a wash basin, mirror, and storage. The engineering that went into these spaces reflects America's growing obsession with efficiency and modern design. When George returns with coffee in a heavy white china cup emblazoned with the railroad's logo, you ask him about his work. "Been with Pullman 15 years now, sir," he tells you, efficiently transforming your bed into a daytime sitting arrangement. This route, Chicago to New York and back, twice weekly. "That's a lot of miles," you observe. George smiles politely. "More than most folks see in a lifetime. Company estimates I've traveled over 1 million miles." And there it is, the new reality of 1928 America. A porter from the south side of Chicago has seen more of the country than most Americans ever will, crossing state lines as routinely as others cross town. The mobility revolution isn't just physical, it's psychological, expanding mental horizons alongside geographical ones. By the time you're dressed and have finished your coffee, dawn breaks across the Ohio farmlands, speeding past your window. You make your way to the dining car for breakfast, walking through swaying corridors that connect the train's various cars, sleepers, a lounge car, an observation car, and the elegant dining car where white-jacketed waiters serve meals on fine china. The dining car tables are set with fresh flowers, silver service, and linen napkins. The menu offers everything from grapefruit to grilled steaks. You order eggs Benedict and more coffee, settling in to observe your fellow travelers. Two businessmen discuss market prospects across the aisle. A wealthy family with young children occupies another table. The children are surprisingly well-behaved in their traveling clothes. A young honeymoon couple sits awkwardly, still adjusting to public couplehood. Together, they represent the upper middle class and wealthy who can afford the 20th century's premium fare, $29.0, one way from New York to Chicago in 1928, equivalent to over $1,300 today. Imagine dropping $1,300 for a single one-way train ticket. That's first-class Pullman service for you. Meanwhile, most Americans traveling the same route would be sitting upright in coach cars for the entire journey at a fraction of the cost. As breakfast concludes, the train begins slowing for its approach to Chicago. Outside the window, the landscape transforms from rural to industrial. Factories, stockyards, and rail yards sprawl across the flat terrain surrounding America's second city. The smell of the famous, or infamous, Chicago stockyards reaches even into the sealed train, a powerful combination of livestock, smoke, and industry that prompts some passengers to discreetly press handkerchiefs to their noses. The train pulls into Chicago's LaSalle Street station, exactly on schedule at 8:30 a.m., a point of pride for the New York Central Railroad. The 20th Century Limited's reputation rests on its punctuality as much as its luxury. George helps with your luggage, receiving a generous tip that prompts a genuine smile, replacing his professional one. Enjoy Chicago, sir. Safe travels onward. You've arranged a busy itinerary in Chicago. Interviews with transportation officials about the city's role as America's railroad hub, visits to automotive plants, and, most excitingly, a trip to Chicago's new municipal airport. But first, you need to take in the city itself. Stepping outside LaSalle Street Station into downtown Chicago delivers an immediate sensory jolt. The noise hits first, construction everywhere, automobiles honking, elevated trains rumbling overhead, newsboys shouting headlines, street vendors calling their wares. The smell follows. Complex urban bouquet of exhaust fumes, industrial smoke, restaurant kitchens, and humanity packed densely together. Chicago in 1928 pulsates with energy and ambition. New skyscrapers rise seemingly weekly. The Michigan Avenue Bridge, completed just a few years earlier, has transformed the North Side into a development boom. Despite prohibition, speakeasies operate openly, many controlled by Al Capone's organization, currently at the height of its power. You hail a yellow cab, another symbol of America's transportation revolution. Standardized taxi services are relatively new, made possible by affordable automobiles and improved urban roads. Your driver, a talkative Italian immigrant, provides unsolicited commentary on everything from Chicago politics, crooked as they come, to baseball, Cubs looking good this year, as he navigates traffic to your hotel. The Drake Hotel represents Chicago's ambitions for world-class status. 16 stories of luxury overlooking Lake Michigan, its lobby a marble and gilt showcase of prosperity. After checking in and freshening up, you head to your first appointment at the headquarters of the Illinois Highway Commission. The commissioner meets you in an office with large maps covering the walls, a web of planned highways spreading across the state like arteries and veins. 5 years ago, he tells you, tracing a route with his finger, you couldn't drive from Chicago to Springfield without breaking an axle or getting stuck in the mud. Now we've got concrete highways connecting every major city in the state, and we're just getting started. The numbers he shares astound you. Illinois alone has paved over 5,000 miles of highways in the past decade. Nationwide, the federal government has funded thousands more through matching programs with states. America is quite literally paving its way into the future. Detroit to Chicago used to be a 3-day drive if the weather was good. The commissioner continues, his voice filled with pride. Now it's 6 hours on concrete all the way. This radical compression of time and space changes everything, where people can live, work, shop, and vacation. The psychological map of America is being redrawn around drive times, not just miles. Your next stop proves this point dramatically. Chicago's Municipal Airport, a dusty field on the city's southwest side that hardly matches its grand name. Yet, this primitive facility handles growing passenger traffic between Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and other Midwestern cities. The airport manager laughs when you ask about passenger amenities. Amenities, he scoffs. We've got a bench and a telephone. Most folks are just happy to survive the flight. Early commercial aviation was wildly uncomfortable and unreliable. Without pressurized cabins, planes flew at low altitudes, bouncing through every bit of turbulence. They weren't powerful enough to climb over bad weather, so they flew through it or, more often, got grounded by it. Nevertheless, you've arranged passage on a Ford trimotor operated by National Air Transport, a predecessor of United Airlines, departing for Kansas City that afternoon. The fare costs roughly 4 times what a train ticket would, but saves an entire day of travel time. The premium is paid for speed. At the airfield, the Ford trimotor sits impressively, its corrugated metal skin gleaming in the afternoon sun. Nicknamed the Tin Goose, it represents the first generation of purpose-built commercial aircraft. With 3 engines for reliability and room for 10 passengers plus crew, it symbolizes aviation's transition from a daredevil stunt to practical transportation. Your fellow passengers are exclusively businessmen whose time is valuable enough to justify the expense, plus one nervous-looking woman traveling to her father's funeral, the urgency overcoming her obvious fear of flying. The pilot, wearing the leather jacket and cap that are still part uniform, part romantic holdover from war flying, greets each passenger personally. Smooth flying today, folks. A little bumpy over the Mississippi, but we'll be in Kansas City by sunset. Inside, the aircraft is Spartan compared to the train's luxury. Wicker seats line both sides of a narrow cabin. Windows are small. There's no food service, no bathroom, and earplugs are distributed to combat the deafening engine noise that will make conversation impossible. The woman next to you grips her handbag tightly as the engines start with an ear-splitting roar. First flight. You shout over the noise. She nods, white-knuckled. My husband says I'm crazy. Says these contraptions drop from the sky regularly. She's not entirely wrong. Aviation safety standards are still developing. Crashes remain common enough that each safe landing feels somewhat miraculous. The takeoff is stomach-lurching, the plane bouncing along the grass airfield before reluctantly surrendering to flight. As Chicago recedes below, replaced by a patchwork quilt of farms and small towns, your seatmate gradually relaxes her death grip on her handbag. The flight is everything the pilot promised, generally smooth, with stomach-dropping bumps over the Mississippi River Valley. Without cabin pressurization, you fly low enough to clearly see details of the landscape below. Cars moving along highways, trains snaking across the plains, and river barges hauling goods along waterways. The layered transportation network of 1928 America spreads beneath you like a living map. 3.5 hours later, compared to an overnight train journey, you land at Kansas City's airfield, another converted farm on the city's outskirts. Your seatmate sighs with relief, crossing herself before disembarking on visibly shaky legs. "Next time, I'm taking the train," she declares. Slower, but the ground stays where God intended it. Kansas City serves as your gateway to another transportation revolution, the emerging culture of automobile tourism. You rent a Chevrolet touring car from Hertz, already establishing a national network of rental locations, and prepare for the next leg of your journey, driving west along the newly designated Route 66. The guy at the Hertz counter hands you the keys and says, "Just had her serviced yesterday. Should make it to at least Tulsa before something falls off." And he's only half joking. Cars in 1928 required maintenance every few hundred miles. Long-distance driving meant being part mechanic, or knowing where to find one fast. Before leaving Kansas City the next morning, you visit a store that didn't exist a decade earlier, an outfitter specializing in automobile tourism equipment. They sell specialized luggage designed to strap onto running boards, folding chairs and tables for roadside picnics, canvas water bags to hang from the radiator cap. Evaporation keeps the water cool, and detailed road maps published by oil companies as marketing tools. The store manager explains the essentials for long-distance automobile travel: spare tubes and patch kits, obviously, a fan belt, extra oil, a compass, a flashlight, and a tow rope, and cash for when you need a farmer to pull you out of the mud. This preparation underscores an important reality. Driving across America in 1928 still requires planning akin to a wilderness expedition. Gas stations exist primarily in towns. Rural breakdowns might mean hours or days waiting for parts. Many roads remain unpaved despite recent infrastructure improvements. Nevertheless, you set out westward the next morning, joining a growing tribe of automobile tourists, discovering America through windshields. Route 66, only recently designated and still partially unpaved, stretches ahead toward the Pacific. It's a concrete and gravel artery pumping travelers through America's heartland. The first day's drive from Kansas City takes you through western Missouri and into Oklahoma. The landscape unfolds at an automobile pace, faster than horse travel, but slow enough to absorb details that blur from train windows and disappear entirely from airplanes. Something new catches your eye every few miles. Roadside stands selling produce directly from farms, hand-painted signs advertising tourist cabins, the forerunners of motels, and, perhaps most significantly, filling stations evolving from simple pumps into service complexes, with restaurants and souvenir shops attached. Near Claremore, Oklahoma, you stop at one such establishment, Red's Filling Station and Cafe, where an entrepreneurial owner has combined gas pumps, a repair mall lunch counter, and tourist cabins into a roadside empire. Red himself, a sunburned man with hands permanently stained with grease, fills your tank while sharing his business philosophy. Used to just pump gas, then realized folks driving through need food, then realized they need sleep. Pretty soon I'll add a swimming pool and call it a resort. He's joking, but his business evolution traces the rapid development of roadside America, an entirely new commercial landscape growing along highways to serve automotive travelers. Companies like Howard Johnson's are already standardizing this roadside experience, offering consistent food and lodging that will eventually replace local establishments like Red's. Inside the cafe, you enjoy a surprisingly good chicken dinner while interviewing fellow road travelers. A family relocating from Arkansas to California, a traveling salesman whose territory covers 4 states, and a young couple on their honeymoon. Each represents a different aspect of America's new mobility. Used to take 3 weeks to move household goods by train, explains the relocating father. Now we've got everything we own in the car and trailer, and we'll be in California in 8 days if the roads stay good. The traveling salesman interjects, 5 years ago, I could only cover my territory every 2 months by train. Now I hit every customer monthly by car. It's changed everything about my business. That night, you experience another automotive age innovation, the tourist cabin. For 50 cents, Red provides a simple one-room structure with a bed, a chair, and a washstand. It's basic but clean and represents an important transition in American travel accommodation, bridging the gap between formal hotels and informal camping that will eventually evolve into the motel industry. Morning brings a continuation of your westward journey through Oklahoma's dusty landscape. The roads deteriorate as you move further from major cities, with sections of Route 66 still under construction. Detours send you along unmarked country roads where wrong turns add hours to your journey. By late afternoon, you're lost somewhere in western Oklahoma, low on gas, with storm clouds threatening on the horizon. The romance of road travel suddenly reveals its flip side: vulnerability to the elements, mechanical failure, and simple disorientation. Just as your anxiety peaks, you crest a hill and spot a welcome sight. A small gas station with a single pump stands at a rural crossroads. The elderly attendant not only refills your tank, but provides detailed directions back to Route 66, along with weather wisdom. Storms coming sure as sunrise, he warns. Best find proper shelter before dark. Reynolds has a hotel 15 miles west. You thank him and press onward, racing the darkening skies. This experience, the mix of freedom and vulnerability, the reliance on strangers' kindness, the constant adjustment to changing conditions, defines early automotive tourism. Unlike train travel's predictability or air travel speed, car journeys maintain intimate contact with the landscape and community while introducing new uncertainties. As predicted, Reynolds proves to have a small hotel catering to automobile travelers. You secure a room just as rain begins hammering the town. From your window, you watch other travelers arrive in weather-beaten cars, seeking the same shelter from the prairie storm that now rattles windows and floods unpaved streets. The hotel lobby becomes an impromptu community as travelers share road conditions, mechanical tips, and destination recommendations. This information exchange represents another aspect of America's transportation revolution, the creation of shared knowledge networks among mobile citizens. Before published guides like Duncan Hines or AAA, travelers relied on this oral tradition of recommendations and warnings. Roads washed out south of Amarillo, warns a salesman who's just come eastward. Take the northern route unless you've got chains and boards. Avoid the hotel in Tucumcari, advises another. Bed bugs the size of quarters. Through these conversations, a map of America forms that no official atlas shows, subjective, constantly updated, focused on traveler needs rather than geographical accuracy. As the storm rages outside, you record observations in your notebook, already planning the magazine article taking shape in your mind. The transportation revolution isn't just about vehicles or infrastructure. It's about how Americans are reconceiving their relationship with distance, community, and possibility. Tomorrow, you'll continue westward, eventually reaching California, where the final leg of your journey awaits, a coastal steamship back to New York via the Panama Canal. But tonight, listening to the rain on the roof and the voices of fellow travelers in the lobby below, you realize you're witnessing America literally in motion, a nation transforming itself through sheer mobility. It's October 1929. The Roaring Twenties are about to come to a screeching halt, though most Americans don't know it yet. Let's check in with the people we've met throughout our journey, because their stories, like the decade itself, are headed for an unexpected final chapter. In New York, the tenement apartment on the Lower East Side feels different now. There's a radio on a small table, second-hand but working fine. A few pieces of modest furniture have been added. The windows have proper curtains instead of hanging sheets. Small improvements that represent nearly a decade of grinding work and careful saving. You wake up in the same small bedroom, but you don't share it anymore. Your brother moved out last year, married a girl from the neighborhood, and they live 3 blocks away in a slightly better building. The bed still sags in the middle, but the sheets are newer, the blanket thicker. Winter's coming, and this year the drafts from the windows seem less vicious. Your father is already gone, still working the night shift at the docks, despite his advancing age and worsening cough. Your mother moves around the kitchen, preparing breakfast much as she did years ago, though her hair has more gray now and her movements are a little slower. Mr. Goldstein says they're hiring at the garment factory again. She mentions placing a bowl of oatmeal before you. Maybe Joseph can get his old job back. Joseph is your brother, laid off 3 weeks ago from the auto parts warehouse, where he'd found better paying work after leaving the garment factory. It wasn't just him. Dozens of workers were let go with vague explanations about inventory adjustment and temporary market conditions. Nobody's panicking yet. Layoffs happen, but there are whispers in the neighborhood, rumors of trouble at banks, and businesses quietly cutting back. Nothing dramatic, just a slow tightening, like the air gradually leaking from a balloon. Your mother glances at the newspaper on the table, frowning at headlines shouting about another day of heavy selling on Wall Street. Stock market news never concerned her before. The financial dealings of the wealthy existed in another universe from tenement life, but lately, those distant economic forces seem to be casting shadows even here. Mrs. Reichert's boy got sent home from a construction site yesterday, she says, worry creasing her brow. Whole project stopped. Something about financing. Your father studied this stuff in his night school business class. He brought home terms like margin buying and speculation that sounded like a foreign language to the rest of you. Playing with matches next to dynamite, he called it, shaking his head at newspaper stories of ordinary people pouring savings into stocks. In this neighborhood, nobody had money for stock speculation, but everyone has jobs connected to people who do. The garment factories make clothes for the wealthy. The construction sites build their offices. The warehouses store their goods. The invisible threads of economic connection run everywhere, even if most people don't see them yet. Let's travel west to Iowa, where the Miller family farm looks considerably different than when we last visited. The old barn has a new addition, built with prosperity from several good harvests. The farmhouse sports a fresh coat of white paint. Most noticeably, the Model T Ford has been replaced by a newer Chevrolet sedan parked proudly beside a Fordson tractor that has revolutionized the farm's productivity. John Miller, the son we met earlier, is 25 now and effectively running the farm as his father gradually steps back. This morning, you find him at the kitchen table with his own young wife, their newborn daughter sleeping in a handmade cradle nearby. Holcomb's foreclosing on the Peterson place, John tells his wife, concern evident in his voice. Bank called in their loan. 3rd farm this month. The prosperity that transformed the Miller farm hasn't reached everyone equally. Farm prices have been declining since 1926, though the drop initially seemed temporary. Farmers who borrowed heavily to expand during the good years now face impossible math. Loan payments calculated on $2 wheat when the market price has fallen below $1. John's father enters, moving stiffly from arthritis, but still strong. "Got the radio working again," he announces. "Think we should sell some corn now or wait?" The radio has become essential farm equipment, not for entertainment, but for crop prices broadcast daily from Chicago. Information is currency in modern farming. The difference between profit and loss is often determined by timing rather than just production. John shakes his head. Prices keep dropping. The elevator man in town thinks they'll go lower still. This is the quiet crisis preceding the famous crash, an agricultural depression already squeezing rural America while the cities still boom. The Millers are doing okay, having avoided excessive debt, but neighbors disappear monthly, their farms consolidated by banks or larger operators. The family Chevrolet, once a symbol of rural America joining the transportation revolution, now serves a practical emergency duty. Last week, John drove the Petersons and what possessions would fit to the train station. They're heading to California, joining an exodus that will become a flood in the coming years. The farming family looks at their radio. The technology isn't just entertainment for them. It's literally financial survival. Market reports, weather forecasts, and crop predictions. This information flows instantly across America now, tying farmers in Iowa directly to trading firms in Chicago, and when those markets hiccup, the vibrations reach farmhouse tables with frightening speed. In Millerville, Pennsylvania, our small-town teenager, Sarah, is now a young woman of 22, recently graduated from normal school and teaching first grade in her hometown. Her childhood bedroom remains largely unchanged. The movie magazine clippings faded on the walls. The Victrola gathers dust since radio became the preferred entertainment. She descends to breakfast, where her father reads the newspaper with unusual intensity. The headlines scream about market volatility. The Dow Jones down nearly 40 points yesterday, nearly 10% of its value, followed by a partial recovery. What does it mean? Sarah asks, pouring coffee. Her father manages the hardware store, but like many middle-class Americans in the late 1920s, he's begun dabbling in stocks. Nothing major, just a few $100s of carefully saved money invested on tips from customers and radio financial programs. Probably nothing, he answers, but his tone lacks conviction. Market goes up and down, always has. But the worry lines on his forehead tell a different story. The radio financial experts whose advice he trusted have been increasingly contradictory lately. Some urge buying this temporary dip. Others suggest caution. Yesterday, a prominent banker on the Collier's Hour radio program counseled listeners to avoid panic while carefully avoiding specific predictions. After breakfast, Sarah walks to the school where she teaches. Main Street looks prosperous. Shop fronts are freshly painted. New automobiles are angled, parked along the curb. Window displays showcase the latest fashions from Philadelphia and New York. Nothing visible suggests an impending crisis. Yet subtle signs appear if you know where to look. The furniture store window that promoted easy credit terms last month now advertises a special cash discount. The jewelry store has quietly reduced inventory. The movie theater has dropped prices for matinees. These are small adjustments, nothing dramatic. At school, Sarah overhears two other teachers discussing their husbands' investments. Frank's broker says to buy more while prices are down. One says confidently, "It's just the big financial interests trying to scare small investors out of the market." The other nods uncertainly. That's what Harry thought too, but his cousin in New York says something's really wrong this time. These conversations repeat across America that October, uncertainty masked with bravado, financial experts contradicting each other, and ordinary Americans trying to decipher complex market movements with limited information. The interconnected media landscape that spread jazz, Movies and radio serials now transmits financial anxiety with equal efficiency. Meanwhile, in Lake Forest, Illinois, the Harrington Mansion appears unchanged in its manicured perfection. Inside, however, the atmosphere has shifted subtly. Howard Harrington, banking magnate and family patriarch, hasn't left his wood-paneled study for 2 days, a telephone constantly at his ear, financial newspapers scattered across his desk. His daughter Catherine, now 22 and recently married to Robert Abbott of the railroad fortune, visits with concern. The household staff moves quietly, sensing tension without understanding its source. The family's 18 domestic employees continue polishing silver and preparing elaborate meals while their employer faces financial demons. "Father," Catherine calls softly from the study doorway. Howard looks up, a forced smile not reaching his eyes. "Just business matters, dear. Nothing to worry about." But there's plenty to worry about in Howard Harrington's world. The financial system he's navigated so confidently for decades suddenly seems built on sand. Colleagues whose judgment he trusted have made increasingly desperate moves in recent weeks. Margin calls, demands for cash to cover investment loans, have wiped out several fellow members of the Chicago Club. The wealthy inhabit the same volatile economic ecosystem as tenement dwellers and farmers, though with more substantial buffers against hardship. Howard Harrington won't lose his mansion if markets collapse, but his social position, business reputation, and self-image all rest on financial foundations now showing alarming cracks. Later that evening, Catherine and her husband Robert attend a charity gala at Chicago's Palmer House Hotel. Outwardly, nothing has changed in this world of privilege. Women drip with jewels. Champagne flows despite prohibition. An orchestra plays fashionable dance music. Yet, the conversation has shifted. Between practiced smiles, men exchange worried updates on specific stocks and companies. Women who normally discuss social matters now reference investments and bank stability. Information and reassurance have become the most precious commodities in wealthy circles. "Harrison liquidated everything yesterday," Robert tells a colleague, quietly over canapes. "Moved it all to government bonds." Panic thinking. The colleague scoffs, but his eyes dart nervously around the opulent ballroom. Markets are fundamentally sound. These ritual reassurances echo through the upper class that October, desperate affirmations of prosperity, while financial instruments, constructed on speculation and debt, begin their inevitable collapse. As Catherine moves through the glittering crowd, she overhears fragments of similar conversations everywhere. The wife of a prominent manufacturer mentions their canceled winter trip to France. A banking associate of her father declined champagne, whispering something about conserving resources. These are small signals of retrenchment amid ongoing displays of wealth. And what about our journalist? Last seen traveling Route 66 westward to document America's transportation revolution. He's back in New York now, sitting in the offices of Collier's magazine, arguing with his editor about the article he submitted. "It's too pessimistic," the editor insists, the manuscript pages marked heavily with red pencil. "Readers want optimism about America's future, not warnings about financial instability." The journalist sighs. His cross-country journey revealed not just America's transportation transformation, but the economic fault lines now threatening to rupture. In California, he observed produce rotting on docks because farmers couldn't afford shipping costs. In Chicago, half-completed skyscrapers stood abandoned when financing disappeared. In small towns across America, bank closures left communities stranded without savings or credit. The transportation networks connecting America physically are remarkable, he explains patiently, but they're also creating new vulnerabilities. Financial problems spread faster too. What happens in New York affects Iowa overnight. The editor remains unconvinced. Rewrite it. Focus on the achievements, the highways, the air routes, the automobile culture. Leave the economic analysis to the financial pages. This conversation repeats across American media at fall. Warnings muted, concerns downplayed, and optimism enforced, even as evidence mounts that the decade's prosperity rests on increasingly shaky foundations. That evening, our journalist walks Manhattan streets deep in thought. The city pulses with energy as always, theaters illuminated, restaurants packed, and fashionable crowds moving between entertainment venues. Nothing visible suggests imminent collapse. Yet small signs appear here too. More men selling apples on street corners than last month. Help-wanted advertisements shrinking in newspapers. Luxury stores offering unprecedented sales. The whispered word recession replacing prosperity in overheard conversations. The journalist stops at a newsstand where tomorrow's papers already headline the day's market activity. Prices steady after recovery. Bankers optimistic. The reassuring headline masks the day's extreme volatility and growing panic among financial insiders. Let's pull back now, seeing all our characters simultaneously across America on this October evening in 1929. They don't know each other. They live in different worlds with different concerns. Yet increasingly, their fates intertwine through economic and media networks that bind Americans together as never before. In the New York tenement, a family worries about layoffs while preparing for bed, their modest improvements to daily life potentially at risk. On the Iowa farm, a young farmer calculates and recalculates numbers that refuse to balance, wondering how long they can hold out if prices continue falling. In small-town Pennsylvania, a school teacher helps her father track his modest investments by radio reports, both trying to decipher contradictory expert advice. In a Chicago mansion, a banker stares sleeplessly at financial papers, calculating potential losses that would have seemed impossible months earlier. And in a Manhattan apartment, a journalist rewrites his article to satisfy editorial demands for optimism, even as his observations suggest caution. None of them know exactly what's coming. Even financial experts don't predict the full magnitude of the crash that will begin on October 24th, 1929, just days away, or the Great Depression that will follow. But they sense the shifts and adjustments, the subtle tightening of economic conditions that precedes visible crisis. What makes this historical moment poignant isn't just the impending financial disaster, but how the decade's transformations created both new connections and new vulnerabilities. The same technologies bringing Americans together, automobiles, radio, mass media, and modern banking, will also transmit economic disaster with unprecedented speed and scope. The 1920s fundamentally rewired America, physically through transportation networks, culturally through mass media, economically through consumer credit and financial speculation, and socially through changing norms and expectations. This rewiring created the modern nation, recognizable in its broad outlines despite nearly a century of subsequent change. When the stock market crashes, just days after our story ends, these connections will ensure no community remains untouched. The tenement worker, the Iowa farmer, the small-town teacher, the Chicago banker, and countless others will find themselves participating in a shared national experience unlike anything previous generations knew. Not prosperity this time, but its opposite. Yet the fundamental transformations of the Roaring Twenties will endure even through economic disaster. Americans who learn to expect mechanical refrigeration won't return to iceboxes. Families introduced to radio entertainment won't abandon it for silence. Communities connected by highways and automobiles won't revert to isolation. The expectations of modernity, once established, proved difficult to surrender. So as you drift towards sleep in your comfortable bed, consider how those Americans of 1929 shaped the world you inhabit. Their automobiles evolved into your fuel-injected, computer-controlled vehicles. Their crackling radios became your streaming services. Their tenuous airplane routes grew into the global aviation network. Their department stores transformed into today's online retailers. The technologies change, but the human desires remain consistent. For connection, for convenience, for entertainment, for mobility, for better lives than previous generations knew. The Roaring Twenties accelerated and democratized these possibilities, making previously elite experiences accessible to millions. As sleep approaches, perhaps reflect on how your own daily life would astonish those Americans of 1929, even as their experiences laid the foundations for the world you take for granted. The threads connecting past to present remain unbroken, though sometimes invisible, weaving through time to create the social fabric we all inhabit together. Hey guys, tonight we begin with the curious, crusty, and quietly horrifying world of Victorian bakers. Men who rose before dawn, worked beside ovens hot enough to bake a small mammal, and unknowingly poisoned their neighbors one sourdough at a time. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. It's 4 a.m. in Victorian London. The streets are quiet except for the occasional horse that forgot it's been dead for 2 days. The smog hasn't quite thickened yet, but give it time. You, however, are already awake. Not because you love mornings, not because you're a hustler or believe in early bird philosophy. No, you're a baker. And in this era, that means you rise before God does. You drag yourself out of a straw mattress so stiff it could legally be classified as furniture and punishment. There's no coffee, no alarm clock, just your internal sense of dread and the sound of your neighbor coughing up a lung, possibly his third this week. You slip into your baking clothes, a flour-stained apron, and the vague hope that today maybe you won't pass out near the oven. The bakery is less cozy pastry shop and more gas chamber with a chimney. It's tucked below street level like a secret lair for someone whose superpower is gluten intolerance. You descend into this flowery pit of despair while muttering something that might be a prayer or just a wheeze. Lighting the oven requires skill, courage, and fingers you're willing to sacrifice. Victorian baking ovens weren't precisely calibrated gas ranges. They were brick furnaces powered by coal and regrets. The fire must be kept roaring from before dawn until the last loaf is sold, or until you accidentally ignite your own eyebrows, whichever comes first. Your hands are already cracking from the cold, but that's fine. You'll be sweating like a boiled ham within the hour. The soot starts settling in your lungs like an unwanted house guest. There's flour in your nose, your ears, your thoughts. You sneeze and a small cloud puffs out. The apprentice laughs. You consider baking him. The worst part, you haven't even started baking yet. This is just the warm-up. The Victorian baker's day is a 16-hour dance with dehydration, fire hazards, and the slow realization that you're essentially the coal miner of the food world, except instead of a canary, you have a loaf of bread that might contain poison. But you soldier on, because in this era, baking bread is noble. Deadly sure, but noble. Step carefully. The bakery floor is a delightful mix of soot, grease, and things that may once have been alive. You've entered the oven dungeon, a subterranean space where dreams go to sweat to death. It's dim, it's damp, and it smells like scorched dough and quiet despair. Think of it as a finished sauna. If the sauna also had a rat problem and zero ventilation. The oven itself, oh, it's a beast. A soot-belching, cold-chomping brick leviathan that dominates the room like a poorly maintained dragon. It doesn't purr. It roars. It cacks. It occasionally explodes, and you have to feed it constantly like a toddler. If the toddler ran on fossil fuels and actively tried to melt your face off, the fire started with coal and prayer. Mostly prayer. There's no temperature dial, no safety switch. You learn the correct heat by sticking your arm into the mouth of the inferno and seeing how loudly you scream. Too little heat and the bread's soggy. Too much and you've invented artisanal charcoal. And then comes the smoke. Not a pleasant wood-fired aroma. No, this is thick industrial soot. It slinks into your lungs, clings to your clothes, and leaves you coughing like you're trying to expel a Victorian chimney sweep from your windpipe. You're sweating already. It's 5 a.m. and you're wetter than a fisher's handshake. Your clothes stick to you. Your hair is plastered to your face, and there's still 14 hours to go. Some bakers tried wrapping wet rags around their necks for relief, a kind of prehistoric cooling device. Others just gave up and embraced the moist suffering. There are no windows, by the way. Why would there be? Natural light might lift morale, and we can't have that. The only illumination comes from a flickering oven glow and a single oil lamp with the brightness of a dying candle. And just when you think you've adjusted, the door swings open and in comes the delivery boy, tracking in street dirt, a breeze of cold air, and the faint reminder that there's a world outside not made entirely of carbon particles. But you stay because the bread must rise, even if you don't. Now it's time to actually make the bread. You know, the thing your entire job is named after. Easy, right? Flour, water, yeast, maybe a pinch of salt. That's all it takes. Except welcome to Victorian England, where everything is either unaffordable, poisonous, or mysteriously glowing in the dark. Let's start with the flour. The good stuff is expensive, imported, clean, pure. So, naturally, you'll never see it. Instead, you're handed a sack of budget flour that has the consistency of sand and the moral integrity of a Victorian landlord. It's been bulked up with chalk, bone dust, and the powdered dreams of orphans. And you still have to sift it for bugs. But wait, we're just getting started. To whiten the flour and make it look fancy, bakers often added alum, a substance that sounds like it belongs in chemistry class and smells like betrayal. It makes the bread bright and fluffy. Sure, it also wrecks your digestive tract and has the nutritional value of wallpaper. Still, the customers loved it, probably because it was the only food that didn't come with visible rats. Then there's the salt, assuming you could afford salt. Otherwise, you guessed it, plaster of Paris. Yes, the stuff used to make sculptures and possibly to reinforce the walls of your bakery, so they don't collapse under the weight of their own shame. As for yeast, fresh yeast was unpredictable and hard to store. So many bakers turned to beer bomb, the frothy byproduct of brewing. It gave the dough a nice rise and a faint taste of regret. But if that ran out, don't worry. Someone always had a stale loaf you could boil down and use as a fermented starter. It's recycling Victorian style. Oh, and water. That's assuming you had clean water, which you don't. What you do have is something that once flowed near a tannery and now has the color of weak tea and the aftertaste of cholera. So you mix it all up in a giant wooden trough that hasn't been washed since the reign of Henry VII. A few stray hairs, maybe a fingernail, just call it rustic. And voila, your dough is ready. Or cursed, possibly both. Ah yes, alum, the Victorian baker's favorite not-so-secret ingredient. If the 1800s were Hogwarts, then alum would be the shady spell you found scribbled in the margins of an old moldy cookbook. Whiteness maximus. Side effects may include organ failure. Let's get this out of the way. Alum wasn't added for flavor, nutrition, or culinary flair. It was added for appearances. Because in the age of grime, soot, and industrial sludge, people wanted bread that looked clean. And nothing says clean like powdery whiteness achieved through aluminum sulfate, a compound also used in tanning leather and pickling body parts. Charming bakers discovered that tossing in a pinch or several fists to vellum made low-quality flour appear high-end. It fluffed the dough, gave it that pristine white crumb, and tricked the average customer into thinking they were eating something safe. And who could blame them? You're not buying artisanal sourdough from a bearded hipster in 1842. You're buying from a man whose apron may or may not contain blood from several species. Now, alum wasn't technically poison. That would be too simple. Instead, it was a slow-burn gastrointestinal nightmare. Frequent consumption caused stomach cramps, vomiting, and long-term damage to the kidneys and bowels. But since no one back then tracked symptoms, unless they involved spontaneous decapitation, most people just blamed the usual suspects. Ghosts, bad humors, or the French. What's worse, alum was cheap, dirt cheap. So the poorer you were, the more likely your bread came with a healthy dose of colon corrosion. Some bakers even mixed alum with pipe clay or ground bones to cut costs. It was less baking and more alchemy. If your goal was to create a pastry that fought back, health inspectors, oh sweet summer child. This was Victorian England. The only regulation was don't get caught. A few reformers tried to raise awareness about alum, publishing pamphlets with titles like Deadly Bread and The Working Man's Intestines, but most people kept eating whatever was available, because hunger has a way of dulling one's interest in chemistry. So, you've survived the oven dungeon and the alum mystery sludge. Congratulations, you're still breathing for now. But let's spice things up with a little arsenic, shall we? You know that classic rat poison that Victorian England kept accidentally sprinkling into its food like it was cinnamon in the grand game of what ingredient will kill me today. Arsenic wasn't actually a baker's first choice. It just happened. Kind of like tripping into a grave. You see, many bakers bought their flour or sugar in bulk from local dealers. And sometimes those dealers' edible goods next to dye powders used for textiles, many of which were absolutely swimming in arsenic, because nothing says freshly milled like sharing a shelf with corpse paint. Now here's where it gets festive. Green dye, particularly the wildly popular Shields green, was loaded with arsenic. It was used in wallpaper, clothing, candies, and yes, even decorative flour sacks. So, if the miller accidentally used a bag that had once held green dye, well, your dough was now a slow-acting chemical weapon. The most infamous case, the Bradford Sweets poisoning of 1858. A local candy maker accidentally swapped sugar for arsenic trioxide. Result, 21 people dead, countless more sick. The authorities called it a tragic mistake. Modern experts call it deeply preventable, with even a hint of labeling. And what about the customers? The ones biting into their arsenic baguette thinking, tastes a bit metallic today, but maybe that's just rustic charm. They'd fall ill, pale skin, hair loss, vomiting, bowel issues that made death look appealing. And if they were poor, no one batted an eye. Probably just overworked, people would say. Or maybe they looked directly at a chimney sweep. That's bad luck, that is. As for bakers, they had no idea half the time. They were too busy trying not to pass out from heat stroke or get kicked by a soot-covered delivery boy. So if arsenic crept in, it was chalked up to one of life's many invisible hazards, like ghosts or spontaneous combustion. And remember, this was all still considered legal because regulations. Those were for people who could afford to sue. Imagine walking into your local bakery. You expect the faint smell of fresh bread, a clean counter, a cheerful baker in a tidy apron. Now erase all of that from your mind. Set the whole thing on fire and replace it with the shirtless man sweating into a wooden vat while whistling through 3 missing teeth. Congratulations. You've arrived at the average Victorian bakehouse. Hygiene standards. Let's just say the only standard was filth. Bakers often worked shirtless because the ovens turned the room into a bread-scented sauna. That would be fine if not for the fact that most of them also had skin conditions, open cuts, and the general complexion of a chimney sweep with seasonal scurvy gloves. Not a thing. Hair nets. A joke. Shoes. Optional. 1 foot infection away from becoming the secret ingredient in tomorrow's crumpet. The flour would stick to their sweaty chests. The dough would cling to their arms. And by the end of the shift, they looked less like craftsmen and more like ghosts made of glue. Now, you may be wondering, surely the bakery itself was at least cleaned. Huh, no. Most Victorian bakeuses were cramped, dark, and riddled with vermin. Rats the size of poodles roamed freely. Flies performed synchronized aerial routines over mixing bowls. Cockroaches had favorite corners, and the walls were often damp enough to grow their own ecosystem. Waste disposal, floor, leftover dough, floor, expired ingredients, mixed into the next batch. Waste not, want not, and remember, flour attracts pests. So the sacks were a buffet for moths and mice who generously left behind droppings and the occasional corpse. Just more texture for the loaf. Health inspectors did exist eventually, but they were few and far between, often bribed or simply ignored. And customers, they had no idea. Bread was the staple of the working class diet. As long as it didn't smell like actual death, a loose standard, people bought it, ate it, fed it to their kids. One report described a bakery with a mixing trough also served as a sleeping spot for the owner's dog. Another described rats falling into the dough and being baked in. These stories weren't outliers. They were Tuesday. And yet, Victorians kept eating the bread because death by loaf was still better than death by starvation. If you thought the only creatures making your Victorian loaf were humans with questionable hygiene and heat rashes, think again. Because in the 19th century bakehouse, there was a second furrier workforce. Rats, bold, nimble, unpaid, and utterly uninterested in boundaries. Victorian bakeuses were paradise for rats. Picture it. Flour dust in the air, warm corners, unsecured sacks of grain, and no one enforcing pest control unless a rat physically proposed marriage to a customer. There were reports, not rumors, but actual reports of rats living inside the walls, the ovens, and sometimes in the flour barrels themselves. It wasn't a pest problem. It was a partnership. Some rats even learned the rhythms of the bakery. They'd scurry out during the early morning mixing, grab a mouthful of dough, and dash off before anyone noticed or cared. Others were bolder, hopping directly into dough troughs, nibbling on the edges of loaves, or occasionally meeting their fate mid-bake. The phrase crunchy crust might have had a more literal meaning than anyone cared to admit. And the bakers, they didn't always mind. Some saw it as unavoidable, like bad weather or cholera. One man was quoted in a health inspector's journal saying, "At least they take the weevils with them." A glowing endorsement of rat-based quality control, if ever there was one. In one infamous case, a loaf was returned because a rat's tail was discovered baked into the center. The baker reportedly shrugged and said, "Takes all sorts to make a meal." Lawsuits were rare because customers were too hungry to complain and too poor to find a lawyer who wouldn't charge in bread. And don't think the rats stayed in the walls. Oh no, they were social, friendly even. Some families reported seeing rats run alongside the breadkers as they made deliveries, a kind of rodent escort service, ensuring the product made it to the market, seasoned. It wasn't just one or two rats. It was colonies, generations, possibly dynasties. There were likely rat families who passed down stories of the Great Loaf Drop of 43 or the Flour Sack Uprising of Spring. So yes, in the Victorian bakery, Your bread might have been kneaded by a man named Thomas and licked by a rat named Gerald. Bon appetit. If you thought the only danger in a Victorian bakery came from arsenic, rats, and shirtless men sweating into dough, allow me to introduce you to the flaming cherry on top. Spontaneous combustion, or as the bakers called it, are not again. Victorian-era bakiouses were basically wooden boxes filled with heat, flour dust, and denial. The ovens were coal or wood-fired monsters, often patched together with spare bricks, good intentions, and whatever hadn't already burned down. They ran constantly because bread waits for no man, and fire safety inspectors were more myth than reality. Flour dust, in case you didn't know, is extremely combustible, like kaboom levels of flammable. All it takes is one spark, and suddenly your charming neighborhood bakery turns into a flaming Victorian marshmallow. And that spark, could come from anything. A dropped coal, a faulty oven door, or the baker's pipe. Because yes, they also smoked inside around open flames next to clouds of dust. While wearing linen soaked in sweat, genius, truly. The floors were usually wooden, soaked in oil, yeast, and regret. The walls were stained with soot and fire buckets. Maybe there was one. Maybe it was filled with flour. Who could say? The worst part, fires didn't even guarantee renovations. Some bakeries caught fire multiple times and just kept operating like it was part of the ambience. Yes, the roof is gone, but look at that crust. If half the ceiling fell in, they'd just board it up and declare the bread wood-fired artisan style. One London bakery burned down 3 times in 6 years. The city council blamed it on bad luck. The baker blamed it on ghosts. No one blamed the literal oven wedged up against a sack of coal and a hanging curtain. Insurance? Forget it. Most working-class bakers couldn't afford it. So when the place burned, they either rebuilt with donations or went into debt, which is hard to repay when your only source of income just went up in smoke. Sometimes quite literally while they were shaping the morning rolls. And yet they persisted. Because in Victorian England, if your bakery wasn't a fire hazard, people assumed your bread tasted like sadness. If you were a child in Victorian England with dreams of becoming a baker, congratulations. You were likely about to embark on a magical journey known as indentured servitude, wrapped in flour and casual psychological trauma. Baker apprenticeships were pitched to families as golden opportunities. Learn a trade, earn a crust, maybe even open your own shop one day. The reality, you'd be shoved into a bakery at age 10, work 16-hour shifts for years, and leave with scoliosis, flour lung, and a deep resentment of yeast. The training system mostly consisted of doing every single miserable task the master baker didn't want to do. Sweeping floors, you stoking fires at 3 a.m., you hauling 80-pound sacks of flour up crooked stairs while being shouted at for bruising the grain. Definitely you. Mistakes were not treated as learning opportunities. They were treated as a personal insult to the master's honor. Flattened a loaf. That's a week of verbal lashings. Burned a batch? Sleep in flour bin? Forgot to polish the oven door? Are you trying to ruin me, boy? Oh, and the living conditions. Many apprentices lived in the bakehouse, usually in a cramped loft above the ovens, next to sacks of barley and an elderly rat named Clarence. It was always hot, always noisy, and always smelled like yeast, smoke, and old socks. Nutrition was ironic. You'd think someone surrounded by bread would be well fed, but apprentices often survived on crusts and crumbs. Full loaves were for paying customers. One former apprentice wrote that his lunch was whatever the rats hadn't eaten yet. Inspiring. Physical punishment wasn't common. It was expected. A cuff on the head here, a boot to the backside there. If the master baker had a bad morning, you became the bread. No one intervened. Not your parents, not the law. and certainly not the guilds, who mostly existed to protect the baker's right to underpay you. And yet many apprentices stuck with it, because what else was there? Coal mines, chimney sweeping, dying in the street. In that context, getting screamed at by a man in a flour-covered waistcoat while kneading bread at 4 a.m. didn't seem so bad. Just don't ask about their emotional development. Step into a Victorian bakery and inhale deeply. Ah yes, flour dust, coal smoke, and the subtle bouquet of permanent lung damage. In the 19th century, the simple act of breathing while baking bread was a gamble, a wheezy, phlegmy game of respiratory roulette. You never quite knew what you'd get. Chronic bronchitis, flour lung, or just the delightful sensation of coughing up what felt like an entire baguette. At the heart of the issue was flour, not the quaint artisanal organic variety with nice branding, but raw industrial powdery chaos. Mixing flour wasn't done in neat sealed machines. No, it was done in open vats by hand in rooms where the air was literally opaque with dust. Every movement, stirring, sifting, sneezing, sent up clouds of fine particulate matter that settled in your lungs like unwanted tenants. Some bakers developed what was known as baker's lung, or more poetically baker's asthma, an inflammatory reaction to constant flour exposure. Symptoms included wheezing, shortness of breath, and in more dramatic cases, the sound of your lungs sounding like a badly tuned accordion. It was so common that some baking guilds considered coughing part of the uniform. But why stop at flour? Victorian bakers also contended with smoke from constantly burning ovens, usually coal-fired, that pumped out thick black fumes like a steampunk chimney on a bad day. Ventilation was considered optional, and if you cracked open a window, it was likely painted shut or guarded by a rat union. And don't forget the mold. Stale bread and damp flour sacks created a fungal utopia. Breathing in spores was just another occupational hazard, like burnt eyebrows or mild hallucinations from alum consumption. Of course, no one wore masks. Masks were for criminals or actors in questionable theater. Protection, maybe a scarf if you were fancy, but mostly you just sucked it up quite literally and hoped your lungs would evolve into something breadroof. And when a baker finally keeled over from respiratory failure, the obituary often read something charming like, "Taken too soon. He rose daily like his loaves until he did not. Inhale, exhale. Try not to wheeze flour onto the buns." In Victorian England, bread wasn't just food. It was ballistic potential with a crusty exterior. When fresh, it was nourishment. When stale, it became something between a bludgeon and a domestic security system. Let's start with the texture. The average loaf, especially the cheaper kind, could go from soft and fluffy to brick with a handle in less than 48 hours. Bakers weren't known for their preservatives or moisture control. By the third day, your humble dinner roll could chip a tooth. By the fourth, it could crack a window. By the fifth, it was legally considered a medieval weapon in 3 counties. This led to a strange social reality. Bread was both sustenance and self-defense. Want to discourage thieves? Display a week-old loaf in the window. Its aggressive density sent a clear message. Need to settle a score with your neighbor? A strategically lobbed crust could do the trick. Arguments in tenement kitchens often escalated into stolid bread jousting matches. It was cheaper than therapy and only slightly more painful. Children, of course, made a game of it. This peculiar quality of stale bread wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a cultural phenomenon. There were even folk sayings about it, like a baker's brick beats an angry wife, or don't judge a loaf by its crust, but by the dent it leaves in a thief's head. The sheer durability of these hardened loaves was a testament to the brutal realities of the era. They had to be tough to survive the journey from the bakery to the home, often jostled in bags or carried through grimy streets. They were food designed for a world where everything, from the water to the very air, seemed to be trying to kill you. And in the end, it was the bread that might just save your life, not by nourishing you, but by knocking out an assailant. It was the ultimate, albeit unintended, multi-purpose product of the industrial age, a source of sustenance and a last-ditch tool for survival. Victorian street kids were already part feral, so when they discovered they could use yesterday's roles like throwing stones, things got theatrical. Market brawls often ended with someone yelling, "Who threw the crumpet?" while rubbing a suspicious lump on their forehead. The army took notice, too. While no one officially armed the Queen soldiers with baguettes, military rations included hardtack, a form of bread so dry and dense it doubled as a tent peg. Soldiers would carve it into dice, file it into makeshift tools, and occasionally chuck it at each other out of boredom or frustration. One officer allegedly broke a window trying to bite his biscuit. The biscuit won, and then there were the bread riots. When prices rose or loaves shrank, hungry mobs didn't protest with signs. They threw bread back at the bakers, sometimes flaming, sometimes with nails in it. Nothing quite says your prices are outrageous, like being pelted with your own product in weaponized form. So yes, in Victorian times, bread nourished the body, but it also bruised it, and in a pinch, it defended your home better than a constable. Truly, carbs were never meant to be this confrontational. To the average Victorian passerby, the local baker appeared harmless, apron dusted with flour, cheeks ready from the oven, smile as warm as a freshly baked bun. But behind that innocent crust lay a dangerous secret. He might have been poisoning the entire neighborhood. Not on purpose, of course. Probably. You see, bread was a daily staple in Victorian Britain, consumed by the ton. It was the backbone of meals, the edible plate, the one thing poor families could count on to keep hunger barely at bay. But here's the kicker. Almost no one knew what was in it, least of all the people eating it, and sometimes the bakers. With little regulation and zero ingredient transparency, baking in the 19th century often resembled a particularly reckless chemistry experiment. Need the bread to look whiter and more expensive? Toss in a little alum, maybe some chalk. Want it to stay moist longer? Try plaster of Paris. Need to stretch the flour. Bulk it with sawdust, mashed potato, or whatever happened to be lying around that looked vaguely edible. Arsenic sometimes by accident, we assume. Arguably, in many towns, customers began to suspect something was off. Children developed stomach cramps. Elderly people keeled over mid-toast. Dogs refused to eat leftover crusts, which in a society where dogs happily gnawed on boodle was a red flag. Health inspectors, those rare unicorns of public safety, eventually took samples and discovered that yes, in fact, bread contained poisonous metals, ground-up bones, and enough alum to stucco a small cottage. One particularly infamous London baker was found to be padding his flour with piped clay. Another had been storing dough next to rat poison because convenience the kicker. Bakers weren't trying to kill anyone. Most were just trying to survive to keep prices low, loaves big, and profits decent in a cutthroat, soot-covered economy. It was corner cutting out of desperation, not malice. Mostly still, if you ate Victorian bread and lived to see the 20th century, congratulations. You passed a digestive obstacle course that Darwin would have applauded. After everything we've seen, the arsenic, the alum, the rats in the rafters, it's not surprising that baking in Victorian England could literally kill you. What's more surprising is how many unique and unintentionally creative ways dough managed to do the deed. Let's start with the obvious. The oven, that cozy heart of the bakery. It was fueled by coal, wood, or sometimes just pure spite, all of which belched out black smoke and enough carbon monoxide to gently lull you into an early grave. Many bakers died not in dramatic infernos, but slowly and quietly, asphyxiated over time while tending their loaves. A warm death, some said, still not ideal. Then there was the dough itself. Enormous troughs of fermenting mass expanding and bubbling like a monster in a Gothic novel. Some bakers, typically apprentices or anyone with the misfortune of being the new guy, had the task of kneading hundreds of pounds of dough by hand. Imagine being elbow deep in a warm, sticky vat while surrounded by mildew, industrial soot, and the constant risk of collapse. One poor soul in Birmingham allegedly suffocated after falling head first into rising dough. His co-workers thought he was resting. He was not. There were also accidents involving mixing machines when such terrifying luxuries existed. Victorian technology, you'll recall, didn't come with safety switches or warning labels or empathy. So when your sleeve got caught in a dough hook, you didn't file an HR complaint. You hoped someone noticed you missing before your kneading arm became kneaded arm. And of course, there were the fires. Ovens exploded. Flour dust ignited. Entire bakeries went up in flames because some clerk sneezed near a gas lamp. One notable London fire in 1861 started, no joke, because someone left bread in too long. The lesson: always set a timer, preferably one that doesn't rely on a traumatized apprentice's internal clock. In the end, Victorian bakers didn't just make food. They risked their lives to make daily poison sound appealing. They worked 16-hour days, inhaled coal, fought rats, dodged explosions, and still got blamed when the crust wasn't golden enough. So next time you nibble a baguette in a cozy cafe, raise a crumb to the soot-stained heroes of the past. They died so we could brunch. After decades of industrial flour fakery, chemical garnishings, and enough alum to mummify a horse, the British public had had enough. Yes, even the Victorians, a people known for enjoying bland porridge and casual child labor, eventually drew the line at bread that glowed in candlelight and made your intestines scream. Welcome to the Great Bread Reform. By the mid-9th century, a few brave souls, mostly doctors, angry pamphleteers, and mothers with suspiciously ill toddlers, began asking awkward questions like, "Why does this loaf taste like a tombstone?" And, "Is chalk a necessary food group?" Cue the rise of public health campaigns and a slew of scientific investigations. Suddenly, food adulteration was a hot topic in Parliament. You know things are bad when politicians stop arguing about foreign wars and start worrying about breakfast. In 1860, the Adulteration of Food and Drink Act was passed. It had all the teeth of a wet biscuit, but it was a start. Then came the 1875 Sale of Food and Drugs Act, which actually had enforceable penalties and inspectors with clipboards. Real ones who wore uniforms and didn't accept "I swear it's just flour" as an excuse. Bakers were now subject to surprise checks, lab testing, and horrifying accountability. Several were dragged to court and forced to explain why their bread could polish a doorknob. Consumers got wise, too. The rise of literacy and mass printing meant newspapers could plaster headlines like "Bread of Death" and "Your daily loaf may be a lie." A kind of clickbait before the internet, but with more fonts. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Some bakers grumbled that real flour was expensive and regulations were for people with something to hide. But public opinion slowly turned against the cheap white loaf and instead embraced the dense, slightly brown, slightly edible truth. By the dawn of the 20th century, Victorian bakeries looked a bit less like chemical weapons labs and a bit more like the respectable carb havens we know today. Fewer rats, fewer deaths, still no gloves, but hey, progress. So, if you've ever enjoyed a sandwich without coughing up chalk dust or seen your bread last more than a day without suspicious mold colonies forming, you owe a little nod to those brave Victorians who dared to ask, Should bread kill people? Apparently, the answer was no. So, what did the Victorian baker leave behind aside from scorched lungs, blistered hands, and a haunting fear of flour sacks? Well, quite a bit, actually. Despite the daily flirtation with death by dough and their near-legendary ability to poison a population without even trying, Victorian bakers helped shape modern food safety standards, workers' rights movements, and oddly enough, public trust in the humble loaf. They were the unsung heroes of the lower crust. Yes, pun intended. No, I'm not sorry. Bakeries evolved from soot-stained hellholes into warm community hubs. By the early 20th century, you could walk into a shop, buy a roll, and feel reasonably confident it didn't contain chalk, arsenic, or powdered mummy. Yes, that was a thing. We owe that shift to years of suffering, lawsuits, and the collective realization that maybe bread shouldn't sparkle. They also left us something cultural, a deep psychological bond with baked goods. There's a reason the smell of fresh bread is considered the most comforting aroma on earth. It's not just nostalgia, it's victory. Somewhere deep in our DNA, a little Victorian ghost whispers, "This doesn't smell like death." Hooray. And let's not forget language. So many of our sayings. That's the best thing since sliced bread, earning your bread and butter, or half-baked idea. Owe their crusty lineage to those soot-covered bakers who once risked their lives for breakfast. Yes, modern baking has its issues. Gluten panic, sourdough cults, and the war crimes committed in the name of low carb. But compared to a time when flour could literally explode, we're doing fine. So next time you pass a bakery or even just unwrap a supermarket baguette, take a moment. Imagine the blackened hands, the chemical fog, the constant background anxiety of surprise fires, and then eat your croissant in peace. Because thanks to the brave flour-coated fools of the Victorian era, bread is no longer a game of Russian roulette. Just remember, they walked so you could toast. Gaius Julius Caesar was born in 100 BC into one of Rome's oldest patrician families, the Julii, who claimed descent from Venus herself through the hero Aeneas. On paper, that lineage sounded divine, almost untouchable. In reality, however, the Julii were no longer a family of great power or wealth. Rome at the time was a city where alliances, money, and military clout determined influence, and the Julii had fallen behind. Young Caesar came into a world where the Republic was unstable, corruption was rampant, and ambitious generals clawed their way to supremacy. His very childhood was set against a backdrop of violence and uncertainty. His father, Gaius Julius Caesar the Elder, held modest political positions, but died suddenly when Caesar was only 16. That left him under the strong influence of his mother, Aurelia, who was widely respected for her intelligence and strict discipline. Aurelia's guidance shaped Caesar into a man who valued both cunning strategy and public image. He learned early that Rome rewarded ambition but punished failure without mercy. Rome itself was tearing apart during his youth. The bitter rivalry between Lucius Cornelius Sulla, champion of the aristocratic Optimates, and Gaius Marius, Caesar's own uncle by marriage, plunged the Republic into civil war. Caesar's family ties to Marius instantly made him a political target. When Sulla eventually triumphed, he demanded Caesar divorce his wife Cornelia, the daughter of a key ally of Marius. Caesar refused. For a teenager to defy the most powerful man in Rome was practically a death sentence. Sulla stripped him of his inheritance, titles, and even marked him for execution. Caesar fled the city, surviving only through bribery and hiding. At one point, he was forced to move constantly under disguise, shifting from safe house to safe house, while Sulla's men hunted him with a relentless fury. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every stranger might be an informant. Eventually, through the pleading of influential relatives, Sulla spared his life, but warned those who intervened. In this Caesar, there are many Mariuses. It was a chilling prophecy. Even Sulla, the ruthless dictator who had crushed his enemies without hesitation, sensed something dangerous and implacable in this young man. From the very start, Caesar's life was marked by risk, defiance, and survival. He had learned that Rome was no place for the timid. To live, he had to be bold. To thrive, he had to be exceptional. After narrowly escaping Sulla's wrath, Caesar's path forward seemed uncertain. Stripped of wealth and position, he turned to the one career that could still elevate a young Roman with nothing left to lose: the military. With no money, no inheritance, and few allies in the Senate, soldiering was his ticket to survival and recognition. He enlisted and soon proved himself far more than a privileged patrician youth. Stationed in Asia Minor and later in Cilicia, Caesar displayed the kind of daring courage that made commanders take notice. In one legendary incident during the siege of Mytilene, he showed remarkable bravery in battle, earning the prestigious civic crown, a military honor awarded for saving fellow soldiers' lives. To a man stripped of nearly everything, this small wreath of oak leaves was more than a medal. It was proof that glory could be seized on the battlefield, even when denied in politics. But Caesar's exile wasn't only about combat. It was also about survival in a world that mocked weakness. His time abroad hardened him, teaching him the art of commanding loyalty and projecting confidence. He studied rhetoric in Rhodes under the famed teacher Apollonius Molon, honing the persuasive oratory that would later captivate the Senate and the people of Rome alike. His voice would become one of his deadliest weapons, as sharp as any sword. Then came a moment straight out of legend: his kidnapping by Cilician pirates in the Aegean Sea. Most men would have begged for mercy or quietly prayed for ransom. Caesar, however, laughed at his captives. He told them they demanded too small a ransom for a man of his importance and insisted they raise the price. During his captivity, he treated the pirates not as masters, but as underlings, reciting poetry to them, ordering them to be quiet when he wanted to sleep, and promising with a cold smirk that once free, he would return to crucify them all. They thought he was joking. He wasn't. He would even participate in their games and exercises, always acting as the one in charge. After his ransom was paid and his freedom secured, Caesar raised a small fleet, hunted the pirates down, and captured them. True to his word, he had them crucified, though displaying that peculiar blend of cruelty and mercy that would define him. He first ordered their throats cut to spare them prolonged suffering. This episode crystallized Caesar's character: audacious, ruthless when crossed, and utterly unwilling to be diminished. He was no longer just a young noble running from Sulla's vengeance. He was a man learning how to bend fate to his will. When Caesar returned to Rome in the late 70s BC, the dictatorship of Sulla had ended, but the city was still fractured by rival factions. It was the perfect environment for a bold young man with charisma, ambition, and a gift for oratory to make his mark. Caesar quickly discovered that politics, like war, was a battlefield. Only here the weapons were alliances, speeches, and bribes. He began with modest offices in the cursus honorum, Rome's traditional sequence of public service. As a military tribune and later a quaestor, he built a reputation for diligence and charm, winning the loyalty of both soldiers and ordinary citizens. Unlike many of his aristocratic peers, Caesar cultivated an image of accessibility. He dressed elegantly, but not extravagantly, spoke to the common people with respect, and made it clear that he was on their side against the entrenched elites. It was the first glimpse of his populist genius, the ability to cast himself as the champion of Rome's forgotten masses, while never forgetting his own pursuit of power. Money, however, was always a problem. Campaigning in Rome was ruinously expensive, and Caesar spent far more than he had. He borrowed enormous sums from wealthy patrons like Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, who saw potential in backing an ambitious politician with the energy to challenge their rivals. In return, Caesar offered loyalty and influence, though he never allowed himself to become anyone's mere client. His career advanced quickly. As aedile, he staged extravagant public games and festivals, filling the city with spectacles that won him immense popularity. The roar of the crowds as gladiators fought or wild beasts were paraded through the streets was a sound he would never forget. It was the sound of a people's adoration, and it was intoxicating. Gladiatorial shows, parades, and lavish entertainments thrilled the crowds even as they sank him deeper into debt. But to Caesar, debt was not a burden. It was an investment in power. He knew that the people's love was worth more than gold, and once he held real authority, creditors would think twice before demanding repayment. Yet Caesar also revealed his cunning in aligning himself with symbols of reform. He honored the memory of his uncle Marius, once declared an enemy of the state, by restoring statues that Sulla had destroyed. This act was dangerous. It outraged conservative senators, but it electrified the public and signaled that Caesar was unafraid to challenge the old guard. By his 30s, Caesar was no longer a man scrambling for survival. He had carved a niche as Rome's rising star. Charming, daring, adored by the people, and increasingly feared by the Senate. The stage was set for him to leap from local politics to the global theater of empire. By the 50s BC, Caesar had maneuvered himself into one of the most powerful positions in Rome. Through a political alliance with Crassus, the moneylender, and Pompey, the celebrated general, he formed what later historians called the First Triumvirate. It wasn't an official office, but it was a pact that gave Caesar the backing he needed to secure the consulship in 59 BC. His term as consul was marked by controversy, but it achieved its purpose. He won command of several legions and governorship over Gaul. This would become the crucible where Caesar transformed from an ambitious politician into a living legend. At the time, Gaul was not the peaceful France of today, but a vast, fragmented land of tribal confederations, restless warriors, and endless opportunities for glory. For nearly a decade, Caesar waged campaigns across the region, writing dispatches that painted himself as both the protector of Rome and the genius of strategy. His commentaries on the Gallic War were not just military reports. They were propaganda, carefully crafted to make him the hero of every story. He subdued tribe after tribe, defeating powerful leaders like Ariovistus of the Germans, and later the united Gallic resistance under Vercingetorix. The siege of Alesia in 52 BC remains one of history's most astonishing feats of military engineering. Caesar's army built dual lines of fortifications, one facing inward to trap the Gauls, and another facing outward to defend against reinforcements. Surrounded and starving, Vercingetorix surrendered, cementing Caesar's reputation as a conqueror. But these victories were not just about military glory. They brought Caesar immense wealth from plunder, slaves, and tribute. They also gave him something even more valuable, an army that was fiercely loyal to him personally rather than to the Roman state. His soldiers adored him for his generosity, his willingness to share their hardships, and his knack for turning battles into unforgettable stories of valor. Back in Rome, however, Caesar's growing power alarmed the Senate. The optimates whispered that he was becoming too dangerous, too popular, too rich. Even Pompey, once his ally, began to view him with suspicion. Yet Caesar pressed on, aware that the Republic was changing and that his destiny would not be confined to the provinces. By the end of the Gallic Wars, Caesar stood as the most celebrated general in Rome, hailed as a savior by his troops, and and as a threat by his enemies. The conquest of Gaul had made him not just powerful, it had made him inevitable. By 50 BC, Julius Caesar stood at a crossroads. His conquests in Gaul had made him unimaginably wealthy and adored by his legions. But back in Rome, his enemies were sharpening their knives. The Senate, increasingly influenced by Pompey, now Caesar's rival, demanded he disband his army and return as a private citizen. To obey meant humiliation and prosecution for corruption and abuses of power during his consulship. To resist meant civil war. For months Caesar hesitated, weighing the dangers. He knew what awaited him if he returned without his legions. Exile at best, execution at worst. His enemies wanted not just to end his career, but to destroy him completely. To surrender would erase everything he had built. His pride and his survival would not allow it. In January of 49 BC, the Senate issued an ultimatum. Caesar had a choice: obey or be declared an enemy of the Republic. He was stationed in Ravenna with only a single legion nearby. The tension in the air was palpable, the silent question of his men hanging heavy in the cold night. When he made his decision on a cold night, Caesar led his men south toward the small river that marked the boundary of his province, the Rubicon. According to legend, as he reached the riverbank, he paused, a final moment of reflection before an irreversible action. Crossing with his troops was a direct act of treason, a point of no return. Then, uttering the immortal words, "Aliae acta est," the die is cast, he crossed with his army. In that moment, Caesar set Rome ablaze with civil war. The reaction was immediate. Panic seized the capital. Senators fled. Pompey retreated to the east, and Caesar marched triumphantly into Italy almost unopposed. His speed and decisiveness stunned his enemies. While Pompey gathered forces in Greece, Caesar secured Rome, the treasury, and the loyalty of the people. He presented himself not as a tyrant, but as a savior who had been pushed into action by his enemy's treachery. Yet, make no mistake, Caesar had gambled everything. A single defeat could strip him of power and life alike. But his genius lay not only in strategy but in narrative. To his men, he was not just a commander. They were fighting for him, not the Senate. To the masses, he was a protector against corrupt elites. The Rubicon was more than a river. It was the dividing line between the old republic and the rise of personal rule. By crossing it, Caesar ensured that Rome would never be the same again. With the Rubicon crossed, Caesar plunged Rome into civil war. Pompey, once his ally, now commanded the Senate's forces, backed by aristocrats terrified of Caesar's ambition. For years, the two titans clashed in a struggle that would decide the fate of the Republic. Caesar's genius was speed. He moved with startling efficiency, seizing Italy, then Spain, then sailing east to confront Pompey at the decisive Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC. Against greater numbers, Caesar's disciplined veterans crushed Pompey's army. Pompey fled to Egypt seeking refuge, but met a tragic end, assassinated on the orders of Pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. When Caesar arrived, he wept at the sight of his rival's severed head, not only mourning a former ally, but recognizing the dishonor of such a death. Egypt, however, offered more than grief. Caesar became entangled with Cleopatra VII, the brilliant and ambitious queen. Their political and romantic alliance secured her throne and gave Caesar both prestige and scandal back in Rome. He lingered in Alexandria, fathering a child, Caesarion, with Cleopatra before returning to the business of conquest. From 46 to 45 BC, Caesar campaigned across Africa and Spain, defeating the remnants of Pompey's supporters. With his enemies vanquished, he returned to Rome in triumph. Hailed as the master of the Republic, he staged lavish celebrations, showered veterans with rewards, and restructured the Senate. swelling its ranks with loyalists. In 44 BC, Caesar took the title of Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. To many Romans, this was the final nail in the Republic's coffin. His power was absolute. He controlled the treasury, the armies, and the Senate. Yet, he was not content with mere survival. He sought to reform Rome itself. He introduced calendars, the Julian calendar we still echo today, launched public works, offered debt relief, and extended citizenship. His vision stretched beyond Rome toward empire. But for all his brilliance, Caesar could not silence the whispers. To traditionalists, he was no reformer. He was a king in all but name, a role Romans had despised since they expelled their monarchs centuries earlier. His honors, his golden chair in the Senate, his statues among the gods, all fueled suspicion that Caesar intended to crown himself. The Republic had not died quietly. It was suffocating under Caesar's embrace. His unmatched power brought stability, but also fear. And fear in Rome was the spark of daggers. By 44 BC, Caesar stood at the pinnacle of his power. He had reshaped Rome, crushed his rivals, and was hailed as a living legend. Yet the very magnitude of his success bred unease. Rome's senators whispered that he had gone too far. His perpetual dictatorship, his divine honors, even his flirtation with monarchy through Cleopatra, all of it nared at the Republic's defenders. The final spark came during the Lupercalia festival. Before the cheering crowds, Caesar sat on a golden chair robed in triumph. His ally Mark Antony approached and offered him a diadem, the symbol of kingship. Caesar refused once, twice. Each refusal met with thunderous applause. Yet the theater of it all convinced many that he desired the crown, but wished the people to demand it. The Senate, guardians of the Republic's traditions, saw their worst fears confirmed. A conspiracy began to form. Its leaders were men of high standing. Gaius Cassius Longinus, a sharp-eared Decimus Brutus, once a trusted lieutenant, and Marcus Junius Brutus, whose very name evoked Rome's founding hero who expelled the last king. Caesar had pardoned Brutus after the civil wars and treated him almost as a son, making his betrayal the most shocking of all. The conspirators wrapped their plot in noble language. They were not assassins, they told themselves, but liberators, striking to save the Republic from tyranny. Yet their motives were not all pure. Some feared losing influence. Others coveted power. The Senate had long been weakened by Caesar's reforms, and the old aristocracy saw its final chance to claw back authority. They chose the Ides of March, March 15th, 44th BC, as the day Rome would either regain its freedom or plunge into chaos. Even as whispers spread, Caesar ignored warnings. Soothsayers cautioned him to beware the Ides. Friends sent letters urging him to stay home, and strange omens filled the streets. But Caesar, confident in his popularity and dismissive of danger, brushed them aside. He had survived pirates, Sulla Pompey. Why fear jealous senators? In truth, Caesar's greatest strength had become his greatest vulnerability, his refusal to believe that anyone would dare strike him. The conspirators sharpened their daggers, cloaked in the guise of patriots, ready to turn the Senate into a slaughterhouse. On the morning of March 15th, 44 BC, Julius Caesar prepared to attend a session of the Senate in the theater of Pompey. The day was heavy with omens. A soothsayer had warned him to beware the Ides of March. His wife, Calpurnia, had dreamt of his statue bleeding while Romans bathed their hands in it. Servants reported strange disturbances in the night sky. For a moment, Caesar hesitated, inclined to remain home. But Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, cloaked as a loyal friend, persuaded him otherwise. The senators were waiting, he insisted, and Rome could not see its dictator appear afraid. Reluctantly, Caesar went. The theater was no ordinary meeting hall. Its marble floors and enclosed chamber provided the conspirators the perfect trap. As Caesar entered, senators rose to greet him, their togas hiding daggers. They pressed around him with petitions, crowding him deliberately. Then, at the signal, the first blade struck. Publius Servilius Casca lunged clumsily, wounding Caesar only lightly. Caesar cried out in shock, grabbing Casca's arm and exclaiming, "Villain, what are you doing?" But in an instant, the rest of the conspirators descended. Steel flashed as they stabbed from every side. The dictator struggled, tried to fend them off, but he was outnumbered. According to tradition, it was when he saw Brutus among them that Caesar ceased resisting. The sight of the man he trusted most, perhaps even loved like a son, was the final betrayal. Ancient writers record his words differently. Some say he uttered nothing. Others claim he whispered, "Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus?" Whether real or a legend, the moment became immortal. Rome's most powerful man undone not by enemies, but by friends. Caesar collapsed beneath Pompey's statue, drenched in blood, pierced by 23 wounds. The symbolism was stark. Pompey, once defeated by Caesar, now stood over him in death. The conspirators, having completed their grisly task, raised their daggers high, proclaiming themselves liberators of the Republic. But outside the Senate, the reaction was far from jubilant. The Roman people who had adored Caesar for his reforms, his generosity, and his military triumphs did not celebrate. Instead, shock, fear, and rage filled the streets. The Republic had been saved, or so the conspirators believed. Yet in truth, the knives of March had cut Rome open, and what spilled out was not freedom, but chaos. The assassination of Julius Caesar was meant to restore the Republic. Instead, it shattered it beyond repair. The conspirators, imagining they would be hailed as saviors, discovered quickly that they had misread Rome's heart. The people mourned, not celebrated. To them, Caesar had been a benefactor. He had canceled debts, expanded citizenship, and filled the city with games and spectacles. The senators who struck him down looked less like liberators and more like jealous aristocrats desperate to protect their own privileges. Caesar's funeral sealed their fate. Mark Antony, his loyal lieutenant, delivered a speech that turned grief into fury. Standing before the crowd, he held up Caesar's blood-stained toga, pierced with daggers, and pointed to each wound as if the dictator himself cried out from the grave. Antony read Caesar's will, revealing that he had left generous gifts of money to every Roman citizen and parks for public use. The people erupted. Their grief turned to rage and riots broke out. Caesar's body was burned in the Forum on a makeshift pyre, the flames consuming not only his remains, but the last illusion of peace. In the chaos that followed, Caesar's name became more powerful than his life. His heir, Gaius Octavius, later Augustus, would use that name to claim legitimacy. Antony rallied soldiers in Caesar's honor, and together with Lepidus, the three formed the Second Triumvirate. Their first act was vengeance, hunting down Caesar's assassins.